Hey, everybody. Knock on podcast. And this is going to be a banger, a smasher, knock smasher. I've
We
got,
did
I've
we did
got
plenty
a,
of knock smashing, man.
yeah, bring that mic close to your mouth though,
Okay, there we
James.
go. Is that
Yeah, that
better?
sounds awesome. Yeah, I've got James Yates, who I think you're long overdue to come on and let's have some discussions, dude. I love what you're doing, by the way.
Thanks, man.
You're collecting data and then giving results. And from what I can see, it seems like you're collecting data from a pretty cool vantage point. I don't see you as someone that's um, I don't know, getting incentivized in the incorrect way to be doing what you're doing, which I love.
Yeah.
So, dude, tell me let's I'm gonna let you tee up yourself. Sorry about that, but I'm gonna let you tee up yourself just because it's such a cool story, like where you started and how you've got into getting so technical now, and you're doing this for Western Hunter. You've got some great Western style articles done, and I think the deeper you've dove into knowing the game, the more you realize like once you dive into a new black hole, it just becomes
Bigger.
endless, doesn't
Yeah.
it?
Yep. Yeah, so I appreciate it, Dudley. You're the man when it comes to archery education. So I first want to say thanks for having me on and, really appreciate what you've done to get a sport that I love out there to the world. So just wanted to kind of lead with that, man. You're awesome. Appreciate all you do. I've watched many knock-on videos, especially in my early years of bow tuning myself, and so you're the man. But yeah, so kind of I guess intro to myself. First and foremost, I'm a husband and a father of two young boys, 6 and 9. I'm a consulting chemical engineer. I work mostly in the energy sector, helping like refineries meet emissions and debottleneck. Also do some solar, some municipal waste type work, but kind of contract with the facility and help them bring about a project. But then, so that's kind of like what pays the bills. But my passion is hunting. I've been hunting since I was a young kid with my dad. And just I actually enjoy all facets of hunting, rifle, muzzleloader, archery obviously is my main focus, but don't I like precision sh rifle shooting, open sight muzzleloader shooting. Anyway, so the from an archery perspective, I've really tried to apply my technical mo engineering mindset to my my archery career. Really, I'm a really numbers focused guy, being an engineer. I deal with data from refineries very frequently, and I try to base numbers on fact, and that's kind of bringing us to how I apply things to my hunting, that to the archery world, bow hunting in particular. So. In my writings in Western Hunter, about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I think I started writing for Western Hunter, managing the archery column. And a general theme of my writing is forgiveness, setting up a forgiving bow for Western hunting. And I've got years of experience. I hunt on the Wasatch Front, which is it's very general OTC type hunting. Anyone in the state of Utah with an archery tag can hunt here, so there's a tremendous amount of pressure. There's 3 million people that live on the Wasatch Front, probably 20,000 hunters. Lots of people recreate on the trails, so the deer are very switched on. So I think it's a really cool proving ground. I
Yeah.
can hunt 20 minutes outside of my backyard. I can literally hunt in the morning and then get to work by 10, 11 o'clock.
Yep.
So I hunt a tremendous amount here. I hunt all over the West. But kind of what I've honed this idea as an archery hunter and a setting up a forgiving setup is my proving ground was here on the Wasatch Front, which is probably one of the most notoriously hard areas to hunt big mule deer. And because it is archery only, we often get some big bucks, but they're pursued by t
Yeah.
tens of guys.
Everybody at the tack.
Yeah, I
Every
mean
single
it.
person at the tack is practicing for a Wasatch Front deer hunt.
Yeah,
If
yeah,
you're at the
exactly.
Utah tack, that every single person there is your rival when it
Yeah, your
comes to
competition.
hunting mule deer after August.
Yeah. So I've killed four really big deer on the front. One was really big. He's knocking on 240. Last year I killed a buck right around 200 inches and a couple others, one knocking on 190 and one just over 190. Um, so yeah, so the forgiveness topic. I get a lot of questions, probably not near as many as you, Dudley, but what's a good setup for Western hunting? And so I've had this kind of overarching theme of forgiveness in my writing. And the one of the biggest aspects is range forgiveness, especially in Western hunting. I've seen more in myself um, and in partners and just hearing about mistakes here on the Wasatch Front. I hear more things about ranging errors than just about anything. Um,
For sure, especially in that type of like cover, you can miss range by 2 yards so dang quick.
oh, easy.
Or you can miss range 5 yards
And you don't
like
even and you
and you
don't even
don't
know.
know it. Yeah, you don't know it.
You come away bewildered, like, how did I shoot over his back? You know how many times
Yeah.
I've heard that? Like, they're just dumbfounded. I mean, I've been dumbfounded. And then
Yeah.
like I go to what I ranged and I put my pack down with an orange flat, whatever. And I go
Yeah.
to where I ranged and like, shit, I was 3 yards off.
And
Yeah.
blanked.
Yeah.
And blanked. Yeah, with the wrong gear. Yeah.
Yep. So that's kind of where all my writing stems from. And I'm a big, the two most important things are a forgiving trajectory and accuracy, probably first and foremost, hitting that broadhead, hitting behind the pin, um, is first and foremost the most important, and then a really good trajectory. Those are my top two.
Well,
And I,
forgiveness would play into the importance of the trajectory. You and I have never really like talked about this, but I'm actually fascinated. And I guess just to kind of pause James for a second. So James actually came forward with a proposal to do a very, very vast aero study where there's a little bit more control within that setting. And so, yeah, and you can correct me if I'm wrong with anything I say, James, but James really went to Easton because in all fairness, I've done a lot of podcasts about this in the past, and I've talked some about the studies that I've done. And honestly, sometimes some of the older studies that I did for Easton had this sort of control, not the equipment wasn't up to this par at that point when I was specific to studies with Easton and some of the original like barrel shaft technology and specifically a lot to when we were really trying to figure out what is the best pre-fletch configuration for a machine to fletch arrows to have the most accuracy
yeah,
with the least amount of negative effect to that. So there was some control, but obviously, you move forward and every 2 months right now, there's a better control. So things are getting better for this. And I've been part of some studies that I'm actually really hoping I can get James involved with, but James literally put a proposal forward that said, I want to do a study testing several different things about archery and arrow flight, but he really needed the control. And
yeah,
so he came forward to Easton so that Easton could provide the control with the facility and a shooting machine that is truly repeatable and that has the backing behind engineers, not only at Easton, but also engineers from Hoyt that came and observed. You had Gideon, right? Which is
Yeah, yeah,
seniority wise. I mean, Gideon's very, very solid. I mean, if not the most solid, they're all master freaking Jedis at Hoyt and some of the main guys at Easton too. But you literally came forward and wanted to do this study with that control. So you went to the Easton facility and you've put together a study that the industry right now is frothing at the mouth to see. um, but there is a tremendous amount of data that is going into this and that has to be analyzed and has to be put forward. And trust me when I say James and Easton and Hoyt are very adamant about making sure that, he goes through his findings in his own process to bring forward that information in the way that collectively everyone respects James' work. And so that work is going forward that way. And I know I think even from my perspective, I knew that I was going to be brought in at some point to like go through some of this with you. Um, but I think there was a little bit of misunderstanding at the beginning of like who was all involved with this. But this was your project, um, along with precision cut, which I
yeah,
think is very, very important. This was James's idea and his creation, and you worked with Precision Cut, who I've actually been using their program for about, I don't know, I'd have to ask him, but maybe for about a year as a consumer, because I really like using products or programs as a consumer before I publicly like say
endorse.
what I'm
Yeah,
using. Precision Cut is got some great math to it. Archer's Advantage, we have to give a shout out to Archer's Advantage, but there's newer programs that are coming in that are diving deeper down the rabbit holes. And so James put together this really cool project, and a lot of other people kind of heard about it who were in the area that kind of flocked in to kind of see all this going down, and I think the results are going to be spectacular and eye-opening for, I mean, your eyes have already been opened,
yeah,
which you've been doing this, which is cool because if you've already for 5 years now been kind of going deeper and deeper and deeper, now all of a sudden you've finally had some doors opened for you to where you're actually utilizing equipment that are normally behind closed doors.
yes,
Easton took a big leap by giving you this machine.
they did.
And so we got to make sure that like for the consumers out there listening, you just have to realize that like there's certain controls that are behind certain doors in the industry that aren't available to everybody. And those are because they technically could be a missing link to a competitor being able to build a better product, right? So this is a risk on multiple sides
Yes.
for you to have access to this. So I'm kind of wanting to use this podcast as an opportunity to introduce James. We're not going to dive into all the data.
No,
Um,
I'm not even close to ready for that yet.
right. We're not going to die like you're not going to come out of this podcast knowing every result, but we're definitely going to give you a couple carrots to nibble on. And we're gonna make sure that everyone understands. One, you're gonna need some patience because there is a lot of data to put forward. Um, but this is really cool because I really see you as kind of the tea party right now. There's definitely some great technical writers out there, and we would be doing injustice to not say there's been some great, normal 80s and like people that did some amazing individual, you know, non-biased product testing for the industry at times, but not everyone has really done it the right way, in my opinion. And so a lot of times when I've done podcasts on this topic, I'm trying to get other people's information out there, and I'm trying to listen to that information and listen to how that information was collected. But I'm also knowing how I've seen information collected, and until this point, some of that wasn't public knowledge. And once you made that post, people for the first time saw like a pneumatic arrow shooter. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
exactly.
But there's deeper levels than where James at right now too, but he is on the right path. That I can tell you. So what I love about this and what I'm taking away from what you said, and I apologize for interrupting because I really want to listen to where you're at because I'm kind of like I could be you might be telling me, Dudley, you're wrong about everything and you're a
Oh,
total idiot. I don't know that. I just know that I love the way you're going about it. You are right now, you're in my opinion, you're like the people's choice to bring in some information to where you aren't a brand,
yeah,
bring it
correct.
in. And see, I was always contracted to do similar things like I feel like you're one of the first people that can look at me now and say like, okay, I've heard some of his podcasts and I'm kind of reading between some of the lines where he's saying one thing but he can't say too much because obviously you got to see some new stuff, and the industry needs this because there's there's always pros, but there's also cons. Like and archery is a very cause effect. And you've probably heard me say anytime you change anything, you change everything. Is that a
Yeah.
very, very fair statement now that you've done what you've done?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's totally archery is it's a system, right? And
Yeah.
you change one thing in the system and it can kind of throw things out of whack.
So you're trying to build a system that can allow the mass of people to take advantage of the advantage.
Sure.
And the thing is, like, when you only put the magnifying glass on a certain portion of that and you make it fit a certain portion, it can be deceptive to the end consumer, I think is fair to say, right? But one of the things that I'm hearing you say right now that's music to my ears, as someone that just wants to see the archer community grow, because that's
Yeah.
really what I want. I
Yep.
want to see the archer community grow. For me, and like, I don't know how long ago it was. Maybe it was 2 years ago. And I know you and I have met at like TAC out in Utah. Or I'm sure I've seen your face.
We
Uh,
we've met just in passing.
okay. I definitely remember your face, but like, I feel like it's fair to say right now, you're seeing or you're wanting more than anything. Accuracy is accuracy is everything.
Yeah.
Like accuracy across the board is got to be the number one argument in our community. And for some reason, we spend way more time arguing private versus public, or, OTC versus landowner, or Sika versus
Mhm.
Kuyu, or what 5 millimeter versus 4 millimeter, and expandable versus fixed blade. And in the end, what is absolutely the most important thing as a hunter and someone who needs to be ethical as a hunter is accuracy. And with that, you've said it perfectly, and this like ties right into what I said on that very first rant that I had about the truth about arrows video. Accuracy downrange is the most important thing. And then what's second in line, which actually affects the first thing in
Yeah.
line, is the forgiveness to the setup because we are not pneumatic shooting machines.
Yeah. Correct.
We are people with human errors in grip pressure, facial pressure, release angle, knock pinch that adds to any of those
Yep.
things. Peep alignment, like the number, misranging, the numbers of factors to miss an animal perfectly is incredibly high. And regardless of how much, like today I passed 10,000 arrows. I'm pretty pumped about that. I passed 10,000. It's May 18th or whatever it is.
That's that's a ton of
Um,
arrows,
and
Dudley.
I want to pass 10,000 and I will pass 10,000 by August 25th for opener. I'll pass another 10,000. But like even at 20,000 arrows, I cannot tell you with certainty that on August 25th, I won't go elk and mule deer hunting up in Alberta and make a perfect shot.
Yeah.
I can tell you that I'm going to put 20,000 pieces of effort to not do that or to make the perfect shot, but I also cannot put money down that it's going to be perfect because of the opportunity of misranging, the opportunity of Mother Nature and weather elements, the opportunity of deflection or, an overhang or canola in front or whatever it is. And then most importantly, the fact that that animal has time, a window of time to be in a different place
Yeah.
than when it was when it stood. So the question is, with that many variables happening, how do I make sure that like if I'm aiming right there, that that is where that arrow is going to go, even if this animal is like, you know,
Yeah. He's moving.
dropping down,
Ducked.
if
Yeah.
he drops down and comes back up, like I still need to know if this is my pin, that's the hole it's going in. For me, that's what's most important to all this. It's what helps me choose my fletching. It's what helps me choose my broadhead. And part of all this data and what I love about it is it's going to raise it. It opens the door, but it also gives more like, well, in this case, if this happens, a mechanical is your best friend. If this
Yeah.
happens, a fixed blade might be your best friend. But the thing is, like, if you're hitting behind the pin, then at least the arrow is going to the closest center of center. And when those other variations are happening, how do I make sure that instead of this thing being this far out of the way, if it does do it, I'm still able to hit there.
Yeah.
And then
Exactly.
this is still a lethal shot. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what this all boils down to, right?
Correct. Yep. Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of why I was introducing this is this idea of forgiveness, right? Setting
Mm-hmm.
up a forgiving and what I find forgiving, at my level of archery, which isn't your level, but it's probably near your level. You've got your entry level, you got your mid-tier guys, and you got your advanced guys. So as soon as you start doing a test like this to come up with like everyone on planet Earth shooting Grim Reaper or a Sever or a Schwacker should shoot this. That's not what this podcast or even this result is about. It's about you need to kind of be real with yourself and decide how good of a shooter you are, and then we can give you some ideas of how to improve your personal setup, right?
Yep.
So, one fix all solution isn't the intent of this study. And the other thing I want to say about the study is you led into it. I have no, I have there's no industry bias here. I have no brand behind me. I'm Yates in the Backcountry on Instagram. That's about as much brand as there is behind me.
Yeah.
Easton did provide shafts and primary funding for the project, um, but the shaft was just a delivery mechanism here, right? For
Yeah.
all intents and purposes, we could have been shooting Gold Tip or Victory or Black Eagle. One thing that I personally like about Easton's is their consistency. Um, I've personally found through other studies that I've done that like Easton arrows group better out of the package, that you need to do far less tuning to Easton arrows. So that was actually a big plus in this study, that we needed to spend less time like knock tuning arrows, for example. But we did do some arrow iterations as well. We looked at variations of arrow diameter. 4 mil, 5 mil, 6.5 mil. We did some variation on arrow length to kind of base to get an idea of how drag of an arrow is impacted based off of both of those diameter and length. But other than that, all of the fletchings were purchased uh, through various means. We did get some small discount from Lancaster because we ordered $2,000 worth of stuff. All the broadheads were purchased either off of the End Brands website or from Lancaster.
Yep.
So everything was purchased, right? So I'm coming at this like
A
we
consumer
want.
buying it out of a package.
Yeah, so
Yep.
we came here with the end goal. And if you guys have if there are issues with what we've done, great. Like
Yeah.
that I'm just giving you this. We're part of me feels like we took too many variables and I would have maybe liked to drill down a little bit more. But at the end of the day, like so I wish for one, so we did two main things. We did a drag day where we were looking at drag of different vane setups, different broadheads, different shaft. And then the second day we did what I call lift recovery, where so there's two, we can maybe we'll set the stage on what governs a trajectory. So the physics, fluid dynamics, so let's call it the physics of projectile motion are governed by a few things. The launch angle, launch velocity, and weight. So there are two main uh, physics equations that are going into projectile motion. The one is the quadratic equation of gravity. Gravity acting and creating that parabolic trajectory that we've all seen in the arrows, bullets. So that is the governing equation for projectile motion. The launch angle and the weight internal ballistics of archery is the propulsion of the arrow that gets into power stroke, your draw length, the efficiency of the
The
cam.
cam, yeah, the
Yeah,
cam
exactly.
designs factor in so much into that number too.
Yeah, exactly. So this isn't a concept. We're not talking internal ballistics. We're talking external here. So
Yeah.
once that trajectory gets started, um, so you've got that gravity quadratic equation. But as soon as you start flowing through a medium, which is air,
Yeah.
you have drag. And
Yep.
drag is a force that works against the arrow's motion, slowing the arrow down. And drag is also a quadratic equation. So when I say quadratic, think x squared. So it's a nonlinear relationship. The faster the velocity, the more drag. So that's what that means. So those are the two governing things. You've got your initial velocity, and then you've got drag working against it. Another concept is the force of lift. Lift is generated from a vane, and it's not the exact same physics, but it's similar to an airplane wing, the shape of an airplane wing or a bird's wing
Yeah.
creates high pressure. The flow of air creates high pressure below the wing and low pressure above it, and that generates lift. The same phenomenon in a different regard happens with a wind turbine. The shape of that wind turbine vane with air moving across it causes a difference in pressure on either side of the vane that causes the turbine to spin.
Yeah.
The
Gets it
same
to move. Yeah.
yeah, the same thing is happening with arrow vanes. It's a difference in pressure on either side of the vane. Now, the big question here is drag and lift often go together, right? That you can't get drag, you can't get lift without some drag, but is there, without getting into computational fluid dynamics, which I have a very strong background in. That's called CFD. You previously had, like a year or two ago, you had Bill Vanderheiden on
Mm-hmm.
discussing when he was talking about a 3D model, he was talking about computational fluid dynamics.
Right.
It's basically this modeling concept where you're doing real physics inside a model, and I have a strong professional background in computational fluid dynamics. In fact,
Yep.
I use the premier CFD tool, which in my opinion is Aspen. is Fluent. Sorry, I use a lot of modeling programs. Fluent. And anyway, without going there, um, just kind of looking at, because I'm not in this to design my own vane, right? This
Right.
is seeing what's out there. So I'm trying to find an arrow design that minimizes drag and maximizes lift.
Yep. And
And
accuracy.
yeah, and the
Yeah.
more, if you can do that,
Or
right? If you
retains the accuracy, right?
Yeah,
That's
retains.
kind of the thing is like what for my in my opinion, what really makes the efficiency of the forgiveness, because you want no different than the cams. We want to put in less effort but get more result. So we're trying to get the maximum amount of forgiveness um with with a minimal amount of efficiency loss, because you
Yeah,
want to maintain that for the longest period of time, right?
correct. Yeah. And that's where I say it's an optimization, right? Minimizing drag and maximizing lift. So if you had perfect lift, your bow would recover within your arrow, which you're tuning your arrows, right? You're setting up a bow and you're tuning your arrows. You want your arrow to recover as quickly as possible out of the bow.
Right.
And maximizing lift will do that, but you don't want to put a parachute on the back of your arrow because that's going to kill your trajectory, right? And
Some
that comes
people
in,
are.
yeah, yeah. And that's a big thing for me. Like one of the underarching themes in all of my writing is a concept I call range forgiveness. I want to know, and I just use 80 yards as my metric.
Yeah.
I want to know how far off, and I do this for every one of my setups. I literally know this. I want to know how far off on my range estimate. I'm just going to always say estimate, right? Because it always is. The range finder is plus or minus a half a yard. A deer's 3 feet long. So if you
Yeah.
range the front of an animal, you could be a yard off, right?
Yeah. Look at an
So
elk.
yeah,
Put an elk at
that's
80 yards.
yeah,
You
that's
know,
that's easily almost 2 yards of
at
difference,
260 feet a second versus 280, that's two very, very different
or even
scenarios, isn't
or
it?
even 300, 310. Yeah, like
Yeah.
so I'm confident in my shooting abilities. I, I try my darndest to shoot 10,000 arrows a year. And I probably am on the faster side personally than what I would recommend to the general public if you don't feel comfortable with your archery abilities, because the faster you go, the more your accuracy can suffer. But if your bow is on point and your shooting mechanics are good and you're just good behind your bow, you can get away with other things. So,
But speed
eh,
can magnify like
problems.
flaw the your if you have flaws in form, honestly, surface area and speed, they magnify mistakes.
Yes.
So like, if the average person isn't able to like when the release, what I tell people, a really good archer that is in the in the realm of mastering the sport, and I've shot with dozens of ones that can do this, but when that shot is breaking, they already know
Or its impact.
what their mistake in their technique was, and they know, oh, I had a little I could feel a little chin pressure on that, I'm going left. Or when this thing breaks, oh crap, my hand's going away from my face, I already know I've sent the string away from my face and back in, which causes a difference in correction. And honestly, I'm to the point, I was telling my son this now. There was when I was shooting the Grinch bow, actually, with the aluminum arrows for indoor, I could hear the frequency difference in the not the vibration in the bow. I could actually hear the frequency of the aluminum arrow, and I could tell when I had torque in it, because the extra drag of that
Yeah.
aluminum arrow down the side of the rest would give a different audible sound. And to
Yeah.
someone that doesn't hear it, you will not, you'll think I'm crazy saying this, but I know when I've made an improperly, front grip shot based on the frequency of the aluminum arrow ringing off the rest,
Yeah, that
you
makes
know.
total sense.
And so all of these things start to factor in to where even if someone is telling you this product is the absolute best product for X, Y, or Z, if you're not perfectly doing X, Y, and Z, the product may not be the
Yeah,
best.
exactly. And that's where exactly, that's where I let off with the, hey, I'm not telling the whole United States and archery is so much bigger than I'm not telling the whole world that, hey, James Yates proved with the shooting machine that this is the perfect setup. You still need to be introspective. You still need to decide how good of a shooter you are and go test things for yourself. Like
Yeah.
my personal bow, because I am confident in my shooting abilities and I know that I can keep it together when a 200-inch buck is in front of me. Um, my bows, especially these new, I shoot a Hoyt as well. The RX-9 is a tremendous shooting platform. My bow, peep installed everything. It's kicking out. I shoot like 81 pounds, 28-inch draw length, a 425 grain arrow. It's 300 with peep in it. I shoot a fairly big peep. It's like 312 feet per second. So I
Dang, you're
have,
screaming. Yeah.
yeah, it's ripping. So I'm not going to shoot a fixed blade with that, no matter how good of a, I could be, Bodie Turner or something. Whoever's
Yeah.
leading I would never shoot a fixed blade broadhead that fast.
Okay, so you could see how much things opened up then with minimal change in technique or form.
Yes, exactly. So as you change, so especially when we went from field tips to mechanicals and fixed blades, and we're talking about a very precision shooting machine. I literally saw time and time again with field tips. We have our control arrow, which is the Easton axis with the Max Stell's 27-inch carbon to carbon length. I saw time and time again the shooting machine stack 12 arrows into a 2-inch circle, like literally shafts touching.
At what
Uh,
distance were you all the way
they were
back?
70 yards. So we
70
got,
yards? Okay.
yeah,
Not
yards. Yeah, so
meters.
we,
Okay.
no. So basically what it was is we used we used the Garmin Zero Chrono C1 Chrono. I don't know
Yep.
Garmin Zero C1 Pro Chrono. We use those to get a launch velocity, a 30-yard velocity, and a 60-yard velocity. And the Garmin needs about, it says 20 yards behind the Garmin before your backstop.
Yeah.
I've personally found I can get away with like 7 or 10 yards. So with velocity readings at 60, we were getting impacts at 70 yards.
Okay.
So yeah, so time and time again, field tips, grouping like that. As soon as we put on mechanicals, now some mechanicals grouped better than others, but in general, we went from field tips to mechanicals to fixed blades. And that's out of a precision shooting machine that was stacking, gr shooting, gold medal type groups time and time again.
Yeah. Yeah. X rings, just
Yeah,
wadding up X rings. Yep.
just wadding up. I mean, we were breaking knocks, breaking veins. It was so yeah. So you need to kind of do some introspection, right? We're not all shooting machines. Like I know
Yeah.
at one point in your career, you were a shooting machine.
Yeah.
You watch Vegas and you guys see what they do under pressure. Some of those guys are shooting machines. We're
Yep.
not all that way.
Yeah.
So there needs to be some introspection, how good of a shooter you are, to maximize your trajectory, maybe a little different for me versus somebody else or for you for somebody else. So now you're educating the masses. So and I get that people need to understand that a one fix all solution for everybody isn't going to be opt is going to be great solution for a lot of people, but it may not be a perfect solution for somebody who's a little bit more advanced.
Right.
So then the other part of our study, the second day, we took the bow. We weren't so we also looked at drag with the bow out of tune. So we
Okay, that's
took,
pretty cool for you to say because like one of the things that you just said, and I don't change your subject, but one of the things that you said was like if you look at the guys at Vegas, they are all shooting machines. Not all of them are the exact same, but what I can tell you about all of them is their differences in equipment choice and their differences in arrow choice and arrow configuration choice is based on if if they're doing what I would bet most of my money to bet on, at least what I always did, is what I tried to figure out is I tried to like redo a mistake and I tried to come up with a configuration that made my mistake miss less.
Les, yes, I
And
love
that's
that.
why, like, for me personally, you never saw me shooting 27-12s or 26-13s at Vegas because I always had less margin of error with my typical errors with a 23-15 versus a 26-13. But that came with like very similar types of things where you start to incorporate a mistake into the control to see how much that mistake magnifies the variation of, of impact. So that's
Exactly.
cool. That's really cool that you were doing that, that you actually took it out of tune. That was one of the questions that I had. I was hoping that you would have done that, but I was also hoping maybe that's one of the things that, Gideon was there overseeing too, just with like the bow tuning. And I love the fact, or bow setup, I guess, but I love the fact in the beginning you said, set up a bow and you tune the arrow to the bow. That's what
Oh
I've
yeah.
always said. And I think now that you're seeing some of these things happening, you're realizing like you can tune an arrow, you set up a bow.
Oh
You know
yeah,
what I
exactly.
mean?
Yeah, so sometimes I've gone off the deep end. One of my articles, I just went way deep, and I fully realized 6, 7, 8 years ago how much that really what that really means to set up a bow and tune an arrow. So I've accomplished. I've been able to get like a 300 spine, whatever, a 4 millimeter axis of your 4 millimeter arrow of your choice going like 300, 305 feet per second. And then to the same bow at the exact same rest setting, I've been able to tune like a 600, 575, 600 grain arrow, 250 spine with a little more weight up front, something like an FMJ, a deep six FMJ. I've been able to get pretty much the same, a near perfect bullet hole out of both arrows out of the same bow simply by weakening or uh, manipulating the arrow spine with the front weight. And it's literally with the bow in the exact same position, no change. And I can literally, I've set up
You
both
can
sides.
overflex an arrow to give you the tune you want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you
So
can create a tune just based on where you're
arrow.
measuring the paradox.
Yep, correct.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I've literally been able to carry two arrows in the quiver that are vastly different that are both very accurate.
Hmm. That's what I did
Eh,
for Africa. It worked really good.
yeah,
Four,
yeah, the two
400, five, 300 or 400 grains difference in arrow shaft. And then both totally different, broadheads on the front,
yeah,
but literally have the same tune. The only difference is, like I
side
think,
marks.
yeah, I think I had for 20 yards with the one arrow, I had to be on like 36 yards instead
Yeah,
of 20
exactly.
or whatever, and then 52 and 69, and then whatever it was, 81 or whatever it was for my Cape Buffalo.
Yep.
But yeah, you can bring two very, very different ballistics kind of out of the same barrel, so to speak.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
if you're doing it right, and see, for me, this kind of lends into some of my very first writing when I wrote like the horizontal impact line, when I wrote about the hill method. I don't know if you ever read any of that.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
familiar with it. Yep.
but so so I did testing based on measuring horizontal impact variation and showing like as you play with spine and you get a spine to properly match a bow,
Yeah.
the hill reduces to a point where it's optimal and then it'll go back out once you
Diverge. Yep.
pass optimization. So what I was showing people is, that's why like I'm not a big bear shaft tuner because I know the hill method brings me to the same place. And if my horizontal impact line is narrow and hitting on the left edge of my if my pin is on the left edge of the arrow shaft, I know the spine is matching the setup,
Yep.
So what's cool about this is you're starting to realize that, there's multiple ways to get to the same destination, but they all show characteristics and not just bow tune, but it's pairing of the arrow, the projectile specifically to the launch platform. You know what I mean?
Correct. Yeah, they both go to yeah, 100% together.
Yeah.
And that kind of experiment. So if I'm on like a big elk hunt where I may be sitting water during, the middle of the day and I'm in open country, that's when I really geek out on that two arrow setup. And I set up my bow sight so that I have literally two different sight tapes on my bow sight and I have the marks. I know the marks for both, and I've killed bulls that way.
Yeah.
'Cause, like we've talked about, my concept of range forgiveness, and we were kind of getting into that where my fast arrow, I can be plus or minus 3 yards off at 80 yards and
Hmm.
still be in the kill zone on a mule deer. But like,
What are you measuring? 8 inches roughly?
yeah, 8 to 10
Okay.
inches.
Okay.
Yep, yep. On the kill zone of a big mule deer. But then like if you have a very known range, like you're sitting water for an elk, I
Yeah.
kind of like my thought of forgiveness is now shot angle forgiveness, right? Because I want to minimize my time in the red zone. So
Yeah.
my fast arrow, I'm going to put a very ballistically efficient fletching on it. Looking at in the past I've shot Severs, Ulmers, Rages, dead meats,
Yeah.
a mechanical broadhead, and then on my like heavy arrow setup, anywhere from I've killed bulls 575 to like 660
Yeah.
with a really heavy walled like FMJ.
Yeah.
I like where the range is what it is. I can pre-range. I'm inside 20, 30 yards. I like shot angle forgiveness to minimize my time in the red zone. So if a deer or a bull are slightly quartering to and I need to crowd that front shoulder a little bit, like I'm not intending to send a 600 grain arrow through the meaty part of the scapula. But if he's slightly quartering to and I hit like the outside edge of the scapula, I want to be prepared for that. So that's my concept between the two, range forgiveness and shot angle forgiveness to minimize my time in the red zone, right?
Yeah.
So those two different thoughts kind of go into those two different arrow builds. Anyway, we're kind of distracted off the main point, but it was
No, but
interesting
I
to
like it.
see. It was
Because those
interesting.
two builds play into this importance of why you're trying multiple fletch configurations
Yeah,
essentially on the same arrow, and also what that fletch configuration means for broadhead A, B, C, D, or E. And then if you have fletchings A, B, C, D, or E, if on fletching A, broadhead C is an absolute knock crusher and just splitting veins and cutting veins off every shot, that same broadhead with shaft or with fletching B can totally fall at the back end of that equation. Now it's not even on the roadmap of being
yeah.
worthy. The just because one thing is a gold medal in the arrow shaft category or the broadhead category, and then you get the veins. They do just because one is gold for one doesn't mean it's going to be gold for all the others, because that's where now lift and drag start
Yeah,
to have real world application that honestly isn't always mathematical.
agreed,
Okay.
100%.
So real quick on one other thing with that. So I've had times where I've been competing and there's times like with headwinds and tailwinds, even with configurations I know are optimal, it's funny that sometimes the air density doesn't have to change much from going from an arrow that all of a sudden is getting lift from a tailwind to the same arrow getting like, and I call it push when it's pushing it down,
Yeah,
to now the same tailwind all of a sudden is giving arrows push where it's pushing down. So it's crazy how many factors actually come into this.
correct. Yeah, and that's where this study, we were trying to be as scientific about this and laboratory about it as we could. So we're inside the Easton Foundation in Salt Lake City. We took now precision cut archery is a very, very robust um, sight tape program,
Yeah. So ballistic
arrow external
software.
external ballistics. It has, we talked about the physics here. It has obviously the quadratic drag. It does solve for the quadratic gravity equation. It does incorporate quadratic drag. It's solving both of those equations simultaneously. It's a fairly robust solver. It takes into account density, altitude. I personally built a sight tape at the Easton Foundation based off of my launch velocity and my 60-yard velocity. And then I've taken it up to TAC at 10,000 feet and, maybe doing something I wasn't supposed to, but stopping short or stopping long on a target. I remember wanting to really test it because I was one of the first to play around with his once he got the
That yeah, the
altitude figured out.
altitude, the
So I
elevation.
so I
Yeah.
stopped at like 146 yards on a mountain goat and used my tape as is, the tape that I built at 4,500 feet in elevation, shot clean over the mountain goat's back. And at the time he had this conversion of, okay, what's your new density altitude? And it'll give you a holdover on that current tape, the tape that you
Yeah.
made.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I recorrected for that.
Was it a yard and a
Bam.
half at 40 at 147?
I think it was two, I can't, this was like 2 or 3 years ago. I think it was 2.25 yards.
Okay. Wasn't far off, but yeah.
No, but at
Yeah.
that distance, that's like
Yeah.
it was like 18 inches.
Yeah. And
Um,
and and that's what's hard for me when guys are going extreme on their arrows for their arrow weight or really trying to focus on the extreme FOC. They don't realize what that arc. I don't know
oh,
why people are saying that the arrow like is faster because you know what I mean?
oh,
When people are saying their pin gap's tighter, that is
yeah, it's
just
not.
in no way happening. Like it's
No.
not happening. If you have a slower arrow, if you have a heavier arrow with a slower speed, it is going to have a bigger scale.
Yeah, it's bigger scale for
Like
sure. The
it
pit
like
the
do not be fooled. Your scale will be bigger. It needs more cast. And if you
yeah.
actually look at his program would tell you that, but like, you know, you can type in if you've got an AX2 and you type in that arrow that you were using that's 423 and then you put in another arrow that's 650 grains and you look at what the arc is at 70 yards,
Oh, they're horrible.
I mean, that is not going to be a shallower arc because it's retaining more speed. I'm sorry, that's very, very wrong. I
No,
mean,
yeah,
you're talking like a 26-foot arc or something ridiculous, right?
yeah. And that's where when I was saying very specifically when I'm building a heavy arrow, when I'm sitting water, when it's a very calculated, like
Yeah.
there's a place for that, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not building up my shafts to have like ridiculous FOC. I'm using a shaft that's 12 grains per inch, right? In order
Yeah.
to get to, and I put some weight up front, but yeah, so that to give you that 80-yard range forgiveness number, I haven't done it for my bow this year, and the RX-9 is just ripping efficient.
Yeah.
Um, but it's somewhere going to be north of three yards on my fast arrow.
Yeah.
Probably I don't have any big plans. I'll have an elk hunt, but it's not like a draw tag or anything this year. So I don't know if I'll mess around with a heavy arrow this year, but to give you an idea, I'm guessing three and a quarter, maybe 3.5 yards of range forgiveness at 80 yards with my fast arrow. A
Yeah.
600 grain arrow is like 3/4 of a yard of range
Yeah.
forgiveness. And I'm
Yeah.
shooting 80 pounds, 81 pounds at a,
Yeah.
28-inch draw length. So not the longest draw, but I'm maximized on the cam position for the
And
Hoyt. So my bow is really,
that's with you talking about the perfect combination that's giving you this.
yeah,
So if all of a sudden that combination now is giving you that, technically you've got half of the optional misrange.
yeah, because the group's
Yeah,
bigger.
yeah, because you've doubled the group. So now technically you can only be half as off with
Agreed.
that. So
Yeah, so that's the biggest thing here. Again, this is where it's all coming back to forgiveness. So we set this up, like I said, day one, we're looking at drag. We're really focused on drag. And the crazy cool thing, Dud, is so getting into the statistics here, we were able to get 95% confidence intervals on our drag coefficients. We Tristan and I at Precision Cut Archery had when I wanted to partner with Tristan, obviously was and fell in love with the software. We became friends. I've had him in the corner with me on this from the very beginning because I knew how powerful his software was.
hmm
And this study, just quick thing, the study was actually supposed to happen last year, but I about I got in a rollover accident last May when the study was going to happen. We had to postpone it, and then kind of hunting season got in the way. But anyway, have had Easton and Precision Cut Archery in my corner on this. And the crazy cool thing about Precision is we're able to back calculate these drag coefficients for every arrow setup. So as you imagine, as you change things on an arrow like weight, you can't just look at downrange velocity, right? Because weight impacts the internal ballistics, which impact the external ballistics. So with precision cut archery, we can analyze the everything about the arrow, the weight, the velocity, and then the velocity decay downrange, and
yeah.
back out a drag coefficient to compare the ballistic efficiency of the arrows. So
Are you documenting at 3 points?
yeah,
Okay.
launch 30 and 60.
Okay.
And our drag coefficients, we have, well, I'll give it to you in terms of velocity. Our downrange velocities with the Garmin chronos, our confidence intervals is plus or minus basically a half a foot per second. So our bottom end, so in statistics, we shot 12 arrows, right? So is 12 arrows a good representation of infinity arrows? Like if we would have shot infinity arrows out of the bow in this shooting machine, what would have been the true mean? So
Yeah.
that's what
Yeah.
statistics helps
Right.
us with. We're looking at bell curves.
Right.
So the 95% confidence interval tells us that we were basically plus or we were that on the low end of the velocity to the high end of the velocity was 1 foot per second.
Yeah.
So that translates to really, 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 really good drag data.
Yeah,
Um,
that's actually pretty staggering if I'm honest. I wonder, I'm playing devil's advocate. But I wonder if like those chronos have some type of a repeater in them. Because let's see a lot of rangefinders, some companies' rangefinders have a mechanism in there to where if they range at the same distance, as long as they're not plus or minus a window of like a yard and a half, it'll give you the last number. That way
Oh, sure.
your rangefinder seems repeatable.
Seems
Okay.
repeatable. Yeah.
So like, I was kind of wondering like, from a chronograph point of view, because honestly, even a good chronograph, like even if you're in a lab like at Hoyt or whatever, where you have a chronograph that's been sent away and calibrated
Yeah.
and tested, and you have usually another one behind it that's calibrated as well, and the lighting has to be so specific. Otherwise, just a variation in the lighting can change several feet a second. So it's really damn impressive that you're talking 1 to 2 feet per second in variation, because I've seen that just from the variation in like knock density from one
Yeah.
knock that's used to a knock that's fresh out of a package.
Yeah, so to your point, we are combing through the data. Velocities do vary slightly, so it's not giving us repeated the exact same decimal on every shot. So it's not doing anything like that. I was really impressed with the data the velocity data that we got from the Garmin's. The other thing that really helps is we have a very, very, very hard back wall on the pneumatic shooting machine. It draws to steel, literally
Yeah.
steel on steel every time. So
Yeah.
it's the exact same draw length every time. One thing that I've personally noticed and learned and took away from this is my consistency in my back wall isn't perfect. And you're laughing because you knew what I was gonna say.
Dude, that's why the freaking silverback is such a freaking stud because it's
Yeah.
making
It
you
forces
break.
you into
It
that. Yeah.
forces you into it, and people do not realize how much their walls vary. Yeah, that's that like you're gonna start your mind is gonna start going into these new directions to where now people are gonna be asking you things, James, and which I'm sure they already do, and you're
Yeah.
like, okay, what level do I address this at?
Yeah, yeah, yes,
Because
yeah,
I can address this at a level that he's going to understand, or I can also say it at a level where I'm going to have to like walk all the way back down to
yeah,
that. So this is freaking awesome. I'll tell you another thing that I love about this is, you know, I've been with Easton and luck, you know, I'm trying to think like when my first Easton school was, but I went to an Easton University, I think in like 1993. Maybe it was 94. But like at that time, you know, I really started to play around with stuff, but then as each decade has transpired and as I've been part of projects, you know, I I honestly as a brand for Knock On, I could I could probably go to any arrow manufacturer I wanted to
I have
and
no
make a
doubt.
thing. Like
Make a deal. Yeah,
and
agreed.
listen, and I can tell you, Easton financially has never been the best option for me. But what I can tell you is when I know what they're capable of making and I know what, like, you see what shafts we choose for our
Yeah,
brand at Knock On, you see the shafts we choose. And I think now that you're testing this, you're realizing like, a lot of people are spending a lot of time getting duped by marketing when there's actually a shaft that is within everybody's budgets
yep,
that is so ridiculously repeatable. And when I see people spending time knock tuning instead of shooting their bow, when people ask me about that, I'm like, dude, I choose an arrow to where tuning is like I don't need to float
not
arrow shafts. I'm not going to do that. By the time I do that, I've got an hour more practice than you. If
agreed.
I have one arrow, which is rare anyway, if I have one arrow out of a, you know, a full quiver full that just seems to not want to get in with the rest of the party, you know what? Trash it.
Yeah,
You know what? Trash it because the amount of time that I would spend picking other shafts that don't have perfect symmetry or they do have a high ridge or whatever else, it's like, man, you stick to match grade. And did you use match grade or did you use standard? Did you use match but check them? Do you
yeah,
remember?
correct.
You
Yeah,
used matched, but
yeah,
so and checked them. And what were they all just straight 5 mil axis?
yeah. So we used 5 mil axis. We used 4 mil axis. We used the 6.5 Sonics as well.
Yeah, I love the Sonic KE. You're awesome. And yeah, that's three of the four shafts that I have. Otherwise, and you know, an FMJ match would be in there for the known distance water hole situation,
Yeah,
you know, that we
correct. Yeah.
talked about, which is very cool. Well, so let's just kind of
So Dudley,
talk about,
one thing I just wanted to say quick.
yeah,
So personally, I don't have a brand like Knock On, and I've shot pretty much every major arrow brand on the market, and to say my personal experience is with other arrows, and I'm not going to say the brands, but just keep in mind I've shot pretty much shot them all.
I appreciate
Uh,
that too, by the way.
knock tuning is important with some brands of arrows, and in
Hmm.
fact, when I got so frustrated with knock tuning and having to cull 3 or 4 arrows out of a dozen, hard-earned dozen that I'm purchasing,
Yeah.
premium 4 millimeter, 5 millimeter type shafts from various brands. The and I bought a Ram spine tester to start looking at spine because I was like, why in the heck am I having to cull so many arrows? Well, then
Yeah.
guess what? 6 years ago, I switched to Easton, and guess how much knot tuning I do now on my X10 Parallel Pros or my Axis Long Range Match Grade? This much.
Yeah, zero. Yeah.
So,
Spend
I
time
mean,
somewhere else, more
yeah, spend
important.
time somewhere else. Like it, so just how the arrow's made, your mandrel rolled, wrap and rolled arrow versus your AccuCarbon. So one step back, my first like major study that I published in Western Hunter was an arrow audit. I took like 13 different arrows across the board, and I looked at spine consistency around the circumference of a shaft,
Hmm.
spine consistency shaft to shaft, straightness, weight tolerance, where those were the primary things. Me, completely independent, looking at them, and I get so many questions like, "Why do you shoot this arrow?" or the knock tuning thing, and I wanted to prove with numbers what I was physically seeing, why I had to cull 3 or 4 arrows out of a dozen with other brands, and it was crazy what I came away with. Like the carbon aluminum products from Easton reigned supreme. The
Yeah.
FMJ was incredible. At the cut time it was the Pro Comp was incredible. And for
Yeah.
a budget arrow, that Axis match grade or even Axis destroy for price
Yeah.
per
Did you
the
try
Axis
a
just
Sonic
just
KE match by
I
chance?
didn't I didn't do the Sonic in that test.
Dang.
But the spine consistency, shaft to shaft, I saw some spine variances on other arrows that would have pushed it closer to the next spine category.
Yeah.
And I was
Yeah.
just like, what the heck? Anyway,
It's so hard to do that without crapping on people, you
and
know?
that's where I said I'm not mentioning names.
Yeah.
And
I did one time I did a company had a very aggressive marketing campaign that was kind of claiming to have a dual spine product. And, there's a huge campaign that kind of went against what Easton was doing. And Easton was actually just being nice and being quiet and just kind of, and honestly, there's just times where like I hear BS to the point where I'm like, it's not about me having to come forward and be the one to say this isn't right. I'm thinking about the guy like you buying, most people I know, like bu going and buying a shaft. And there's times where someone will show up at a hunting camp with a set of $350 a dozen arrows. And I know they can't afford that. And they're like, dude, they're just the most accurate. And I'm like, you could have bought 2 dozen Sonic KEs and been further ahead for your consistency throughout that entire dozen. And I know that. But like in that case, it was so simple because it was a carbon arrow. So I just threw it in a fire and I'm like, okay, this thing's going to burn. And in the end, you're going to see the fibers laying there. And let's see if there's two different types of weaves. And there wasn't. The dual spine was based on the fact that the back of the shaft was film dipped,
oh,
which is so misleading to the consumer, and I think now that you're diving down this rabbit hole, you're going to realize like it's really hard to make any type of definitive claim is pretty hard to make in archery because there's too many physics and motion and a human
Yeah.
behind it that, most people don't know why they hit low on a shot, let alone, you could look at a pro, they're going to be like, yeah, I came out of my peep sight on that one, or, I had a little bit of high pressure on there. Like,
Yeah.
they may know, the average guy definitely does
Doesn't
not.
know.
And the reality is, like, what makes if a shooting machine can do this, then a pro can, you know, some pros can still do
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
I
yeah,
know at one time I know that I could outshoot people that ran my shooting machine, and I'm
yeah, for
just
sure.
like, dude, you sit there and do that, but I'm going to get 10 times more down range. And if I know I make a turd shot, let's just eliminate it out of the
Yeah,
skew.
yeah,
You know what I mean? But if the shooting machine can do, that at 70 yards, then a good shooter is probably going to do this. And like a crummy shooter might still be like that, but that's when this is the beginning.
yeah,
If you have this to the beginning and then you need to triple that because of your shooting ability, okay, well now you have the people that are spraying shotgun splatters, at the 70-meter bail
yeah.
because they weren't starting like this and their technique brought them to that,
To that, yeah, the compounding, yeah, the flaws in the tune or the build kind of compound with the skill of the archer. But yeah, so yeah, pretty much we cycle through all the arrows ballistically first. So the same arrows that we used in the ballistic testing where it was all field tips. We started with field tips looking at, and then we
How come
screwed
you
on.
use the bulge tip out of curiosity?
So that's a good point. So what's the best field tip? Well, what do you want your field tip to accomplish? Do you want a field tip that matches your mechanical broadhead a little closer, or do you
Yeah.
want a field tip that's got the most or the least aerodynamic drag? We tested them all.
Yeah.
So I like, especially, I don't have a strong background in target archery. In fact, I'm a fairly competitive person, and I've tried my darndest to stay out of competitive archery because archery, I have a very, very stressful job. I'm dealing with projects that are north of $500 million for refineries.
Yeah.
And archery is kind of, and I'm just a kind of an overspun personality in general. So archery is my like,
R&R.
yeah, it is. And I
You
just
want to
don't
keep
want,
it that way.
and I want to keep it that way. So I
Yeah.
don't mind doing these tests like, and I'm doing this out of the graciousness of my heart and
Yeah.
I'm not benefiting from them. I don't have a brand that I'm promoting. I'm not selling a Vane. So my thought here is did I conduct this test perfectly? No, there's probably some holes in it. But guess what? It, I'm a, I'm an engineer, I'm a scientist, and I'm bringing this to the world, and I'm going to be transparent with what I did. Like, I
Yeah.
would have loved to have another day to shoot more groups with the bow out of tune. I'll just flat out say it. We were able
Yeah.
to shoot groups of 4 arrows, right? So statistically, that's not going to hold up as tight as the the ballistics where we were, able to get that plus or minus, 1 foot per second that we were
I
talking
mean,
about.
that's insane just because of the fact that, even shafts can be inconsistent enough to give you that.
Correct.
I mean, 1 foot a second is like even the surface of the arrow being different can
A
do
little
1 foot a
rougher.
second. Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
Yeah, because
Absolutely.
friction is real, and friction is different than drag. It's an energy loss that's different than drag. Yeah, it's for real.
So,
So yeah, so
yeah, go
that,
ahead. Go ahead. I have more questions, but I mean, I don't want to interrupt you.
so yeah, so the whole thing, how we conducted this study, it I'm gonna try to be as transparent as I can about it. And people need to understand that there is no overarching governing body that says this is how thou shalt conduct a test like this. This was James' science lab,
Yeah.
right? And this is me. I wanted to cycle through, I think we had 35 Vane combinations and 25 broadheads. Like we couldn't shoot every broadhead with every Vane. Do you know the combinations of that would have been endless. So We
Yeah.
chose a characteristic mechanical to when uh, we chose a fill tip, a mechanical, and a broadhead to shoot the bow, and a fixed blade broadhead to shoot the bow out of tune with to represent all those categories, fill tip, mechanical, and fixed blade. And we
Yeah.
cycled through every Vane iteration with those just to see how, quote unquote, this Vane steered a typical mechanical broadhead or that Vane configuration still to fixed blade broadhead. Um, so I mean, I could have used that shooting machine for a week, right? Like at one
You can
point we
shoot
were
it. You can end up using it for the rest of your life, and you're just gonna go deeper and deeper
deeper
and
and
deeper.
deeper,
And
yeah.
yeah, dude,
So
it's
we
just gonna
wanted,
get deeper.
so next year I've like Tyson at Easton's already like talking about giving me budget to have the shooting machine for more. Like next year I've already got some really good ideas for wind drift. And the physics behind wind drift, yeah, drag is that frontal drag is a big aspect of wind drift, but there's
Yeah.
another component, 10 to 15% that drag number doesn't give you. I want to look at that. I want to debunk, if I'm shooting a high FOC arrow at 20 yards, because I want that penetration. And when I say high FOC, I'm not getting extreme. I'm still probably less than 20 on that
Yeah.
build because I'm using a heavier shaft. Like I want to debunk there's a ton of FOC and really heavy arrows. I want to do FOC next year.
Yeah.
There's other things that we saw. You had alluded to this earlier, and I wanted to give the example. Extreme helical on vanes. Everyone thinks that that's the bee's knees for tighter groups. And the crazy thing was, it was actually shocking because I'm managing this study. The Easton engineers are shooting through the shooting machine. Tristan's logging data. So Tristan and I are running around with our heads cut off. Tristan's the precision cut archery guy. And I'm looking through the spotter occasionally to make sure everything's is what I think it is. And we're shooting groups like this, and then all of a sudden, and we're still shooting field tips
Yeah.
and all of a sudden I see a group like this, and I'm like, what happened to the shooting machine? Stop, stop, stop. We check the bow, it's still shooting a bullet hole. Check the shooting machine, nothing's moving. I'm like, what the freak is going on? So I just chalk it up like I don't know what's going on.
Parachuting.
It, but you know what it was? And it happened like, so there were three or four veins that are commonly used with this high helical that we did. So we several of the veins we did a straight fletch, no offset, a Bitzenberger standard offset with a right helical, so 2 to 3 degrees of helical with the right helical clamp, and then we did the Arizona ease fletch, I think it's called. It's like 5 degrees of
Yeah, let's
helical.
just honestly, it doesn't matter. Let's just say anything 5 degrees or
Yeah,
over.
yeah, agreed, agreed. So every time one of those big helical arrows got up, I'm telling you, the groups went from like a 2 inch group to like a 4 inch group and
Yeah.
just random flight. It
Did
just,
you check them though? Like, so I mean, the up close, they're gonna correct
yeah.
faster. They're gonna
And
correct faster, but then, yeah, the further you go, the more that deceleration starts to seriously oppose a problem. And honestly, even though they will correct, I'm just gonna speak off my experience. You're gonna have your own data, but even though they correct faster, the fact that there's more deceleration downrange, the accuracy begins to like not justify itself because
yeah,
it deteriorates at a level that doesn't make up for what you gain at the front end. Is that what you
agreed.
saw?
Yeah, so then you go and screw a big fixed blade broadhead on this, right? Like a really consistent. So just to be transparent, when we get to the lift recovery testing, the bow out of tune, we used a gold tip fill tip. And I'll because I that gold tip and the iron will fill tips with the bulges,
Mm-hmm.
they just match mechanical broadhead flight a little better
Okay.
with that bulge. Those are tips that I both shoot. Now, if I've got a target archery build that I'm gonna go, to tack with or whatever that is not my hunting setup, there are
Yeah.
certainly more aerodynamic tip choices. That sever tip, I believe,
Well,
was
sever, you
super.
can just put the set screw in and you're shooting
Shit.
with the head. That's
Yeah,
how, and
correct.
anytime you can shoot with the head, shoot with the head. That's honestly with the T2, that's what I loved about it is I can't lock it, this way, but the blades flip backwards if you pull it out of a foam target. And I just shot it as it was, and the blade just kept holding up. But with the Sever, ultimately, originally that was the Ulmer Edge, which
Yeah,
was
exactly.
part of, my project back with, Rusty and Trophy
Yeah.
Taker. Um, that was definitely the best practicing
Yeah, it's
head
great.
option, period, but then you have to start, your next look is going to be you're going to be looking at so many different things,
Yeah, so
you
so
know.
Dudley, cool thing that I've been doing for years, you can take a little bit of epoxy and put it in the ferrule, and
Uh-huh.
I glue my fixed blade, I glue my mechanical shut.
Yeah, yeah, you definitely can do that. I've done that, and I've kind of done a little piece of wire or something where it's
Yeah.
one grain. Uh, Out of curiosity, did you happen to check like a straight field point or even like Easton's match point compared to, like, I know you like the bulge, but maybe that's because of previous tuning experiences that you've had. I wonder
It's the
what the
bulge is to match because obviously you're gonna even if you're shooting a sever or a T2 or whatever it is,
you're
even
just
if
trying
you
to match the drag
yeah
variation on the front.
yeah just so so drag and accuracy aren't the same thing either, right? So
Yeah.
for example, the iron will wide,
Uh-huh.
that broadhead has a lot of drag. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
giant broadhead, but it's
Yeah.
really, really, really consistent. It
Yeah.
grouped really well,
Yeah.
but it cuts into it cuts into your trajectory a little bit because of that drag. So don't
Yeah.
think that if a vane or if a broadhead has a lot of drag that it's going to group poorly. That's not the case.
Yeah. It's just your pin gap will actually be bigger than what your field point pin gap
Yes, correct.
was, because, it's not that your head is hitting low, it's that it's
S-
slower at that destination.
Yes, correct.
And yeah, and these are things where, like, you're going to be in a very, and I'm hoping this podcast helps you with this. I hope it does, because right now your DMs might be like this. I mean, your DMs once you put this out are going to be,
Yeah.
four roofs high. And, and that's the hard part, is there's so much cause and effect to what these things. Well, I'm really happy to hear that in regards to, the extreme helical. And listen, I think that totally had a place with recurve archery, with shooting a trad bow and shooting a recurve and having an
Fingers.
arrow
Yeah.
that's coming off a hard
Yeah.
shelf or off
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
someone's
Yeah.
finger,
Yep.
and it's having to stabilize. But the thing is, like with a compound bow, we're not doing that.
No.
We have higher efficiencies than we've ever had in archery. We would have had to been using 130-pound recurve bows to like have the
Yeah.
same type of apples to apples projectile, similarities. And then, even on top of that, it's like I actually I had this discussion with some Hoyt engineers, and I was walking around the Hoyt department with the engineers just looking at the different arrow setups, and a lot of them have different ones. But what's funny is, it's not like they're not weirded out about like what the arrow is trying to do when it first comes out of the bow, because I personally feel like there's really kind of two stages to the arrow needing to do what it needs to do for extreme accuracy. This is my opinion. I feel like the thrust of that, the string thrusting this no different than a pole vaulter, leaning back and starting to bend that pole. There is a serious disturbance when the paradox begins,
Yeah.
and when that arrow is starting this part of, its thing, there's a lot of I guess, variation in opinion on whether or not you want this thing trying to correct this way. This trying to correct, I guess, for the people watching, trying to correct this way when it's still unstable this way.
Yeah.
Like, I think you want a perfect match to where this thing stabilizes that fast and then the rotation's beginning.
Yeah.
That's what I personally see. A lot of people are trying to correct two different things at the same time, and it gives you some really weird things happening. It's like just because a string, and sometimes what your string is causing that natural rotation to
Yeah.
do, that can change over time as your string starts to wear into your cable tracks and
Yeah.
it starts
Yeah.
to build a new flat spot where it's seating differently or it's got hot and the waxes came out of your
Yeah.
string,
Yeah.
the string
Exactly.
is getting tighter.
Yep.
You're totally tuning a completely different thing after your initial setup with a bear shaft. In my opinion, extreme accuracy downrange on a target, your instability with your paradox needs to correct fast.
Yeah.
And then I think your rotation needs to begin with a stable rotation once that is starting to plane out too.
Yeah. Playing out. Yeah. That's a good point. Like, from the physics, this obviously is not an internal ballistics discussion. But what we do with compound bows versus recurve or finger shooters, we don't. There is a little bit of horizontal knock travel because of the cable guard, right? So if the cables came down straight in line with the
Well, there's a
bowstring,
lot. Just to be clear on this, the cable rod is the determining factor to make all of this very, very different. Like this information varies from bow to bow because,
yeah,
well, I can tell you this. Okay, like right now, a lot of people are shooting a bow that's very similar to one that I did. Okay. The difference is I specifically wanted a rod and not a roller. And I definitely didn't want a roller that's further back from the pivot point. The closer forward that goes, kind of the better you are. But there's people that hold that patent and people that share patents to where some people can
yeah,
use it, some people can't. But yeah, the further those cables come back on the system, the more that starts to magnify the induced torque on the bow system, which kind of gets translated into this projectile that's trying to propel forward while the torque on the system is also moving forward. So
yeah.
there's like two things trying to become stable at the same time.
And then you've got the force. Obviously, we deal mostly with the porpoising you're talking about and the paradox. um, is it kind of in the vertical plane because of the force of the arrow rest, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
horizontal knock travel because of the cams and the cable guard, and then you got your vertical with the upward force from the arrow rest.
Hmm.
That's obviously different than an arrow
Well,
coming in
and your
contact with a shelf.
your natural knock travel based
Tra
on the
vertic,
cam
yep,
system
the
because
vert the vertical knock travel. Yep.
yeah, you really have to watch that too. Because every system's different and as an industry, we've actually got closer together with what industries are doing. Most companies have a pretty good knock travel right now. A lot
Yeah.
of them are a slight ramp. In the past, there's been some that went up, then down, then
Yeah.
back to center. Some just skyrocket straight
Yep.
up. Some actually went down, and that's why your arrow rest is at a funky position at rest. And you're like, wait a minute,
What? Yep, yep.
for me to get a bullet hole, I'm having to do this?
Yeah.
Well, if you use shooting machines enough, you start to actually see that at full draw of where your arrow's starting point is versus when it's at a resting point. And a lot of times when that arrow rest is out of the way in the first 6 to 12 inches of the power stroke, it's really what the arrow's doing at the back portion of that draw cycle, not at the closing
Yep.
portion. Yeah,
Yep.
that's super cool. What about
So we didn't look at any internal ballistics, right? Like, and
okay.
you're gonna have with your that's something that I want to do.
Yeah, I want to
I've
do
kind
some of this with you. It's been a
I
while
mean,
since I've done it, so I'd love to jump in. I don't want to trump your project by any means, but I would love to these were fun times, but they were extremely time consuming.
yeah, they
You
are.
have much better you had way better help now than than what we did back then.
Yeah, and credit to Easton for that, man.
Yeah.
I could not have. There was a bill that needed to be paid for this, and I needed support, and I needed if precision cut archery wasn't on board, I would have had to develop some math on my own. Fortunately, Tristan was just so willing and able to help me with this,
Yeah.
and then I needed that control and that shooting machine, and then a budget.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Well,
the
what about
yeah. So questions, yeah. What questions? Go ahead.
well, so I guess before we go any deeper, when can people expect to start seeing some results? And I mean, are we going do you want to do some of that? Do you want to do a follow podcast or anything like
Yeah,
that?
yeah, so it'd be great to do a follow-up because we're a week post the study now. I work 40 to 45 hours a week as a chemical engineer. I've got family, young boys, maintain a fitness routine. Like again, this is me fitting this into my life. So it's going to take a few weeks, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm using software to go and analyze, and I have to put in quite a bit of effort to analyze, like especially when we got to the lift recovery, when I'm looking at displacement of how well did vanes shoot compared to the fill tips when
Yeah.
the bow was out of tune. Not only did we take the bow out of tune, we took the bow out of tune a half an inch, but then we also torqued the bow consistently the same way in the shooting machine every time for every arrow. So we
Yeah.
have both aspects there. And I've got
Where did
hundreds
you
of
induce the torque from?
the grip.
Only in the grip?
Yeah, in the
Okay.
grip.
Okay.
So the draw portion that's fixed. How the shooting machine is fixed, and I feel like that contact point, and you're gonna know more about this than me with your vast experience, but it seems like a lot of fundamental issues. Yeah, there's face pressure, but man, that bow arm contact with the bow seems to be the most critical. And in my experience, helping people.
Yeah.
That's the biggest, you know, you I
Well,
think
I tell
people,
people that the thing is your front hand is the first and the last thing to
yes.
determine the path of the arrow. And when
Yeah,
I
agreed.
say that, people don't realize that, archery is physics. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. The bow isn't wanting to go forward. When you shoot, the bow is collapsing. You're taking a bow and you're drawing it back, and it's creating two triangles.
Mhm.
And all they're wanting to do is collapse on themselves until they contact the front hand. And for every action, and that action is it is compressing here against the hand, and then the reaction is now it's projecting forward, and it's projecting at a different path based
On
on
that front hand. Yep.
the front hand.
Yeah, so we're on
So
the same page. That's the critical connection.
yeah,
So that's
yeah.
where we torqued it. So we produced a little over a half-inch tear out of paper, and I gotta give a shout out to Hoyt here. Um, Hoyt's new RX-9.
Did you do an ultra or just the nine?
We no, sorry, I say RX-9. That's
You
what I'm
did an
shooting.
AX2, I
Yeah,
thought.
we did an AX2.
Okay. So
Um,
yeah, and that'll be
but
so
but
damn rigid too,
it's
that platform.
yeah, same can system. Sorry, I keep saying RX-9. I shoot an RX-9 personally. The AX2, I was really pleased out of a shooting machine the how minimal the horizontal knot travel was on that bow. It like we had to take the rest quite a bit out of tune to generate a even noticeable paper tear. So basically the forgiveness, and it helps that exactly like you explained, that arrow that we chose is in a really good spot tune wise, so that band that you talked about, the forgiveness band, like when you hit that sweet spot, the rest position or the cam spacing position with the arrow properly spined to the bow, it you have a wider sweet spot. And
Yeah.
I was surprised at how much we had to take the bow out of tune to generate that half inch, 5/8 inch tear.
Yeah, and that doesn't just come from, the cam type style. It's honestly, I assumed when I came back to Hoyt that I was just going to throw the stock grip in the garbage can and put my put a flat back or side plates
Yeah.
on. I honestly did that at the beginning, and I was kind of like, why isn't this shooting the way that I want, And so I went back to the grip, and I actually, for the first time, surprised myself at that. And then the last time I was at Hoyt, I talked to him specifically about what all they put into like the design of their grip. And I really feel like they've got the most accurate, like, stock rubber grip of
Yeah.
any company right now for what that is. Out of curiosity, do you remember, like, did you take that bow home with you? Do you still have it for future testing?
Uh, no, Easton's got it.
Oh, they do.
Yeah.
I'm curious where their spacer position was.
In order to take the bow
Thin
out of tune
silvers on
enough.
the right.
So it was silvers on top. So, um, I think we ended up,
You
I
had to
think
flip them.
I had to flip them to take the bow out of tune enough. I couldn't get enough rest adjustment.
Yeah.
We were using a ham ski. Um, and it doesn't have the most rest adjustment, but yeah, we moved the rest basically as far outside to get the bow out of tune, and it was only producing like a 1/4 inch tear, and I was like, "What the freak?" So
Yeah, well, with it getting out
swapped.
of the way in proper time too, it's giving you more forgiveness than if that thing was riding something out. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah. So I swapped the spacers anyway. Ended up getting the bow out of tune like 5/8 of an inch, and then we torqued the bow. Figured out the torque that we needed to apply to the rest to get it to tear about 1.5 inches.
An inch
So
and a half tear? I thought you said a
yeah,
half inch.
no, no,
An
no.
inch and a half?
No, no. A half inch was the bow out of tune with it properly in the shooting machine.
Okay.
With it, so we took the bow out of tune like a half inch.
Okay.
And then beyond that, after we figured out where the bow was with it in the shooting machine the right way, we torqued the bow in the shooting machine to generate like an 1.5 inch tear. The with on top of, so the compounded effect was the bow out of tune and the torquing produced an 1.5 inch tear.
Yeah.
Does that
Well,
make sense?
yeah, for sure. And honestly with Hoyt with their tech riser, I mean, from a from a torsional rigidity point of
Yeah.
view, that thing is so freaking bulletproof with that truss system. That's pretty cool. I love the fact that, you're someone that has the credibility to do these, but you're starting to do things that kind of, I don't know, I hope it gives people some ability to like trust and realize, it's killing me right now. There's people paying double the price for a dozen arrows, and they're just getting marketed to, and they're literally getting an arrow that's a fraction of the cost, made overseas, and they're using the money that's being paid to that product to just market to them three
Market. Yep.
times more.
Mhm.
And it sucks. It sucks. And it sucks, it sucks for the end consumer for one, but it also sucks like there's nowhere to really have like full transparency to all that stuff. And sometimes, I feel like Easton is making such ridiculously good product in America, right in Salt Lake. And a lot of people would be so much better off knowing all these types of little nuances to what would just make them better and use the extra time to just shoot and practice.
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna definitely catch back up on this. Like, no question about it. I'd love to be more involved, but certainly that's like I told you before, I will certainly give you a podium or a pedestal to get your message out there. I would also love to be involved because I do love this stuff and
Yeah.
it's probably
Yeah. Take
nice for
care.
people to hear it from another place. But the only other question I had was, so during some of your induced torque,
Mhm.
um, you guys probably started to realize how fast vane height becomes seriously problematic.
Yeah. Yeah. Correct.
So,
So
so did you like you told me that you were kind of surprised with it, once you got extreme on the helical, that there was diminishing return at a certain point,
yeah.
there becomes diminishing return on that. Did you see the same thing with high profiles?
So high profiles. So just in general, now I'm going to speak to some. In general, d depends on what rest you're shooting, and cable guards are closer than others on some
Yeah,
bows. So it really depends on the shooting machine. But in general, in the past, helping other people, I don't love high profile vanes for two reasons. One, contact issues and noise. The
yeah,
noise thing just might be my perception. I'm not a deer, but taller vanes are noisier.
yeah,
But contact is a real thing. Like, it's just crazy to me. Some of these rests don't have a ton of clearance, right? And the
yeah,
cable guard doesn't have a ton of clearance. So
yeah.
to to go and
Knock
throw,
indexing is way more important. Like if you're listening to this podcast, I can tell you if you're going to spend time on anything, spend time indexing your knocks and making sure that every one of your knocks is turned to where your vein clearance is absolutely like if you're
maximized. Yeah.
watching this video, there's a big difference in this. I shoot this PM 2.0 for my tack setups
Mhm.
because I want maximum clearance for my
Yeah.
scope and less
Yep.
drag down range. But if you have a full size, if and this isn't a great example because this is a max stealth, which is pretty damn forgiving. But with some bows, if your knock indexing is like that, and then it's like that,
Yeah.
you're contacting your rest, or you're contacting the inside of your housing, or you're contacting your cable rods. Like, if there's anything you do, knock your arrow, have your rest in the up position and a down position, and even mark, if you want to put some lipstick on your veins and shoot that thing through your system. And if you're getting perfect clearance, you need to know exactly where that knock indexing is and make sure that it's that way. Because the amount of people that I see at TAC that'll say, they'll shoot 100-yard Bigfoot shot, which a lot of them are jeopardizing clearance on their scope
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway. They do one arrow. Well, what cracks me up is when people want to do their arrow upside down on a QAD
Yeah.
rest to
Yeah. And
get
they've got
clearance with the
yeah, and they've
blazer
got like
vane.
a blazer vein going
A
straight
blazer
down.
vane straight down, you are contacting the rest.
Yep.
Period. And
Yep.
honestly, a blazer vane straight up, you also could contact. You need to have that thing at like 1 o'clock. When you're
Yep.
looking behind the string, it needs to be at like 1 o'clock. But
Agreed.
spending time on knock indexing more than like, you know, checking all your knock positions because of an irregular circumference of the shaft, which ends up making the spine very variable.
Yeah.
I think
Agreed.
that's more important. But what did you find that did you guys do
So,
any sound testing?
no, so sound testing, we did, but we didn't like the data. The data that was there, it was too echoey in that
Yeah, I was gonna
room.
say, yeah. You need to
And
be in like a tube.
yeah, we're actually, so one of Tristan's good buddies that came down to help us compile the data with Tristan as we were shooting. Um, his dad is an audio engineer, and Tristan and John and John's dad, are going to be constructing a sound chamber
Yep.
with John's dad's advice,
Yeah.
and the legit audio testing is going to happen in about 2 weeks.
Okay.
Um, so working with an audio engineer on that, we've got $1,500 in sound equipment that we're going to be using. So It's going to be the best that we can do. We're thinking at this point that we're going to put small audio clips on Tristan's website, Precision Cut Archery, so you can like listen to the Vane
Yeah.
as it goes by. So that'll be pretty cool and pretty interactive.
Yeah.
Um, but so
Yeah, and then you're
the
gonna have to do the same thing with the broadhead
yeah,
and the
so
vane configuration.
yeah, right. So many things. So the thing about height, right? So like I don't think there's any question that height really helps recover an arrow. But
Yep.
you have contact issues and you have that, with some guys, I shoot a spot hog, that boonie, I love that boonie. I shoot a two pin,
Yep.
425 grain arrow, 310-ish feet per second. I can shoot, right? Like I have clearance out to like 170 yards.
So with your is your if your top pin is 20, what's your I guess your second pin would depend on your
It's
sight
nothing.
length, but are you around
I
41
I
or something?
I suck my sight in. I like so if I was ever had a dovetail, my sight's all the way in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I shoot the pick sight, the Hoyt pick sight, that's pretty close in as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or the hard mount is close in as well. I believe
Yep.
you do the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
I don't like
I started the
getting my
whole way
sight.
out there,
Yeah.
and that was like my first 3 years in archery because that was the fad at the time, and I was like, man, the physics do not support this. And then the pin float, talk about target panic, right? The pin
Yeah.
float from your sight with your sight way out there, and you just see that pin float. You're concentrating too much on the pin float instead of like executing a good shot because your pin
Yeah.
float's ginormous. So you suck that sight in, your pins come closer together, you get way better clearance. And then the
Yeah.
other thing I focus on is a low anchor point. So I shoot um, I shoot an index finger release, not definitely not a puncher. I kind of I do it like I shoot a precision rifle. I kind of get into my anchor, I'm pulling in my wall, checking my pin float, and as soon as when my pin float is minimized and I'm really liking how I'm holding on target, I'll slowly start to squeeze this trigger and it breaks clean.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a hybrid command style shot, but it's the same mechanics. It's not drive-by, right? My pin float is doing its thing. I'm strong in my shot, and then I start to squeeze that like I would a precision match grade trigger on a rifle. And
If it's
it's
going off without you knowing when it goes
yeah,
off, it like I don't even like the term command. You're either making it go off or you're not knowing when it goes off.
yeah,
It's either unanticipated or it's anticipated. Like we can name it whatever way we want. Do you anticipate it or are you not anticipating it?
yeah.
And then there's like a flinch window that, some people's flinch window is non-existent, even if they make it go off, and then some people's flinch windows get
Yeah.
bigger when they know it's making off,
Yeah, and it
they're
and it really
making it go
depends on
off.
the person too. Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Anyway, so yeah, all this to say it's been a really fun test. And to get back with the vane height, there is I mean the physics are physics. Like the higher that vane, the more restoring torque it's going to be able to
Right.
supply.
Yeah.
But that's not to say that it's not to say that it's the best, right? There are other issues you have to consider. And
Well, it might be
certainly,
the best for a certain projectile that's on
yeah,
the front
correct.
of it, but it's not the best. And
That's
if you're going to say what is the best for the end consumer, well, if the end consumer only wants product A on the front of their head,
yes.
this
Then
is
I
a
can tell
yeah, then you're asking a very different question,
correct.
because now we're kind of coming back to do we want penetration or do we want trauma?
Yeah,
Because now we're back to fixed blades versus mechanical,
mechanicals.
because I'm here to say if you give me if you give me 16 inches of penetration on anything I shoot at,
I
but
don't even think you need that.
you could tell me that it would be behind my pin and I can have I would venture to say 12, but I
Yeah,
think 16, but if
safer.
you could guarantee me that I will only get 12 inches of penetration, but it will 100% be behind my
The
pin where I
pin,
want it to go,
dead.
I would take that rather than you guaranteeing me a pass through without knowing the true accuracy of it.
But you're like this on your group.
Yeah,
right?
or even
Yeah.
half that I wouldn't be okay with. Because
Yeah.
the thing is, like, even that with a kill zone that can
Yeah.
move half of that,
Yeah.
even at 40 yards, could move half of that. These are just things that, like, I know I'm not perfect. And that's why I practice. I
And you're
strive to be
shooting
perfect.
20,000 arrows before August. That's absurd. Like
I
that, that
normally, if I'm like during full training years where I didn't have like a hunting season, I could do, I average around 30
yeah.
typically. But like now I make a hard stop for like dedicated practice. Once I get into hunting season, I practice at camp, but I'm not worried about like numbers.
Yeah, and
And I
I'm
should,
I'm
I
a
should be, but it just comes down to
no,
time, you
it does,
know?
but so you're in a unique position, right? Archery is your way of life,
Hmm.
your income. I You have a family, you have other hobbies and interests. I know that you do a lot of cooking, and I'm sure there's stuff that to Dudley that I don't, and maybe the world doesn't even know.
Yeah.
Like I shoot 10,000 arrows a year, and I'm not a target archer, right? Like I am a bow
But you go to
hunter.
the Easton Center 3 times a week.
3 times a week, and then I blank bail in my garage to
Yeah.
get my other reps. And I'll tell you what, people who think that blank bailing does nothing, that is completely false.
I
Blank
just
like
wrote that in my post today when I talked
s-
about that for my
seven
numbers.
7 yards in my garage is super meaningful. I mean,
Well,
it helps
mine's
build
right
my
there and I
strength.
shoot at 3 yards.
Yeah, so I mean, blank bailing is huge. Most 60% of my reps are blank bailing. My
Yeah.
6,000 and 10,000 arrows for a non-target archer, like 10,000 arrows is a lot. Like
Hmm.
I feel like I'm constantly shooting to hit the 10,000 mark. So just so like when it all comes down to it, I want to give guys confidence with this study, with their setup, like put some numbers behind some things, but at the end of the day, I can't unless I have a one-on-one with you, I'm not going to be able to say that you need to shoot this vein. I'm going to have a better idea
Yeah.
of what to recommend to a guy if you're shooting this broadhead and I see your groups, I see like ultimately I want to see how your groups look downrange, right?
Yeah.
I want to see you consistently shoot at 7 yards. I want to can see you shoot maybe not even 7 yards, 5 yards, 15 feet. I want to see how repeatable your shot is before I would give an exact recommendation. But the idea here is that we're going to present the data. We're going to jump on another podcast with you when I've got fancy charts here in a month or so. And we
I'll
intend
come out.
like,
I'll come out.
yeah,
Or you
that'd
can
be
come
badass.
here either way.
Yeah.
I don't care, but
Yeah.
I'll come out there, or you can come out this way. Either one would work.
So we'll have these results and you'll be able to just see like you'll be able to see what each did, what Vanes did, how the broadheads did, and more importantly, you'll be able to be introspective and say, man, yeah, occasionally I'll be shooting my bow through paper and I get an inch tear just randomly and um every third shot and it's maybe if it's not arrow specific, right? If it's not an arrow that you need to cull and you're just not consistent, you need to be real and you're probably going to need to put more fletching behind that arrow
Hmm.
than what the drag says, right? So like what Dudley could get away with or what I could get away with to maximize my trajectory isn't maybe necessarily what every archer should do. So I just want to be
Yeah.
cautious about that. And
Yeah.
then with fixed blades, um, I also just don't love the notion of just throwing, getting the tallest vein out there and fletching it because you're gonna have contact issues. You're gonna the
Noise.
noise,
Yeah.
a ton of drag. So it's still at the end of the day, unless you're sitting and I don't haven't done a ton of whitetail hunting, but still there's
Yeah.
some variability on range, even in a whitetail stand. Like if you're in Texas or wherever places else that allows feet, if you're sitting a feeder or sitting over water where it's a very known yardage, I think that you could put a crap ton of vein on your arrow and get away with it, or like a really heavy arrow with a lot of penetration and momentum. You take a slightly quartering two shot or whatever. But that's a very, very unique circumstance, right?
Well, and the hard thing about that circumstance too is based on the data you're seeing, you're 100% right. You certainly could do that, and you're not going to be getting to, diminishing return from like terminal velocity, and then increased deceleration. However, in those two situations that you just said, food source, destination food source, and destination water source are both like the go switch is flipped on for string jumpers
Yeah.
because now this is just primal instinct of crocodiles and
Yeah,
hippos
yeah,
kill stuff at water sources.
yeah,
So, you go to Texas and a string jumper in Texas is a real freaking thing. Here in the Midwest, it's certainly real when they bust you, and it's hard to know. Like sometimes you can whistle at a deer and they stop, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they jump inside out, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes what I've learned from cameras is animals, I like it when an animal isn't reacting to the bow going off, but then when you see them like looking to
yeah.
locate an
That,
inbound projectile,
yeah,
that's a problem.
that's a problem.
That's actually a more serious problem. So yeah,
I
like you're saying, even
I
though
agree.
someone could say like, "Hey, this steers this particular product like a field point," great, but does it sound like,
A freight
free
train.
a freight train coming in? Yeah, it does. So like
I love that you
back
said
when
that, because I agree with you. For whatever reason, and I don't, whitetail are probably the notorious string jumpers, and I plain out do not have a lot of experience with whitetails.
yeah,
So my philosophy on my heavy arrow is elk over water, and their reaction
yeah.
is not the same as a whitetail.
Yeah. They can
So
pick
that's
their feet up and it at 20 yards your arrow's already there before
yeah,
their mass in motion. They're like a guy shooting Vegas with, 10 pounds on his bow.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
it
exactly.
takes longer for that
For
mass to
correct.
get in motion because it's a heavier weight to begin with.
But
They
I
might,
th
if their feet were up and once they're going, they might fall at a
thought
much
that yeah,
faster rate, but their vitals are also double the depth,
yeah.
so you kind of get away with it. But yeah, and like
So
when
my
people ask me about
experience,
FMJs, I'm always like, if I'm hunting moose, I know my short shots are 40 or less. And if I'm hunting elk on water sources
yep.
or tree stands, like, yeah, take the extra 50 to 80 grains with
Yeah,
you.
exactly. Exactly. So the other thing that you said that and I don't have a lot of data for it, I'm not an audio engineer. For whatever reason, it seems like um, that combination of the bow going off and then the arrow hissing
It's the
towards
follow
them.
up. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's the follow up.
I think the bow going off, if you're just out in the woods and you hear a random bow go off like at tack,
Yeah,
you could be 50 yards for something and you hear a bow go off. It is so sudden and so snappy fast. It sounds honestly like a stick breaking.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
but 1 second, half a second to one and a half, depending on your trajectory or whatever, that continual hiss
yeah,
coming towards a deer, that is completely unnatural.
yeah.
That is a continual noise, not just a distinct
That's
crack.
inbound, dude.
That's
Take
inbound.
cover.
It's
Take
coming
cover.
closer.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that is the noise that I'm shooting a 425 grain arrow out of an 80-pound bow. My bow has a little bit of snap to it.
yeah,
And I've killed some 8-year-old switched on mule deer in one of the most heavily hunted areas in the country. Now, I'm not saying that they're whitetails,
yeah.
but very, very cagey mule deer.
Mule deer
And
jump through their own buttholes too, dude. I've
yeah,
seen it. Like they're just as tough as a whitetail when they're alert. I mean, honestly, a decent mule deer is equal to a large whitetail body wise. So I mean, I think their reaction time's fairly similar. But even an antelope, you
yeah,
look at an antelope, I mean, those things can duck and like, if they go from like looking to where they heard the bow to then going up, now all of a sudden they're just flipping inside out.
yeah, yeah.
You know,
So
it's the second audible, I think, that has the most negative effects on the animal's reaction. The animal might be startled from the initial sound, but a secondary audible definitely has a less favorable outcome. And
So
the
that's
broadhead has a lot to do with that. You take
yeah,
a great broadhead, fixed blade broadhead, and you put bleeder blades on it, which it needs, but the wrong style bleeder blades or the wrong venting hole in a fixed
venting.
blade. And
Yep,
next thing you
kills it.
know, it's like you got a cobra coming in.
I mean, you
Yeah,
could
these are
hear
all very cool.
in the shooting machine, dude, very you could hear that I could hear that arrow, some of the big fletching with a vented broadhead, I could literally hear it until it impacted.
Yeah,
My
from behind
human
it.
ear
Yeah,
from
from
behind it,
behind it.
not
Yeah.
not inbound,
Yeah.
but outbound, right? Like so I'm not trying to say dump on anything, but there are things from a bow hunter's perspective that need to be accounted for, which is why I'm not a big proponent of just throw a crap ton of Vane on the back of your arrow.
Yeah.
We just talked through ourselves in a circle that whether you're dealing with string jumpers, you know, moose, elk, whatever, you can get away. It's probably best to design a really heavy arrow, but we can't get away from maximizing trajectory.
Yeah.
Like time and time again in this podcast, we're talking about maximizing trajectory, and throwing a crap ton of vane on the back of your arrow does not maximize trajectory.
Yeah.
It can hurt you on sound, which we've kind of you have vast experience in the whitetail woods and out here in West. I have a vast experience hunting extremely cagey public land mule deer here on a heavily hunted unit. And I've just always wanted to steer away from a ton of fletching and a ton of tall fletching. So personally, I wanted to do this study to understand what vein I could get away with on a sever or a T2 or a dead meat. And then what vein could I get away with on like an iron will solid? I really like
Mm-hmm.
iron will solid performed
Yeah.
really really
Yeah.
well. I mean it,
Yeah.
and I want to know can I
It's
steer,
an awesome made, fixed blade broadhead. If
dude?
I
And
was a fixed blade broadhead person, I would certainly have some in my quiver. Like
the
there's no
iron will
doubt about it.
solid drag wise performed extremely well.
Yeah.
And and I can I steer effectively with a bow out of tune and me maybe making a crappy shot in the field? Can I correct an iron will solid with maybe something that isn't as tall?
Mm-hmm.
And personally, a big reason why I wanted to do this study was to figure this out. Like I said,
Yeah.
my science lab.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just been really cool to see, and I'm learning more every night. Like I've been up till 2 a.m. every night, like doing these photos and trying to get the displacement with the software. And Tristan's doing some of the ballistics, and we need to compile results. And like I said, like was this foolproof? The drag testing, I think, was pretty foolproof. We got really good statistics on that. I
Yeah.
really wish we could have shot more groups with the bow out of tune, but we chose to do fewer shots and more encompassing. Um, and this isn't going to be the first one of these. Like I said, I did an
Yeah.
arrow audit a couple of years ago. We did this one. I want to test things that coming up in the future. And at the end of the day, it's just to kind of help get guys up the learning curve a little faster. They can be a little introspective and with some science and numbers behind it, make some good decisions. And we're all learning
I
students of the
hope at
game here.
some point the information just helps simplify people to chase less rabbits.
Yeah.
That in the end, they don't shoot good enough to ever understand any of it. They're on the opposite side of the spectrum. The reality is most people aren't consistent in their shooting and they need something that helps band-aid their mistakes.
Yes.
Like I'm seeking perfection from a technique point of view, and I know what makes me miss less. I've purposely stuck with those because they produce for me in the field. And I'm just trying to narrow my accuracy variation as small as possible because I know my projectile recipe gives me, is it a 10 in every category? No.
No.
like there's no way, we're literally picking characters for like, Mortal Kombat. It's like
Yeah.
somebody's got power and somebody's
Yeah.
fast and somebody's very accurate and has, awesome combinations. That's what, like, now that you're doing this, you probably have a very different appreciation for, like, when I was testing to like confirm what the offsets needed to be for like presets for True Flight. Like, imagine, which now Easton owns, but imagine you're trying to find a combination that is the most forgiving
For everything.
for the biggest range of variables.
Yes.
So like when people ask me about like the arrows that we make, and like, listen, we take every Bitzenberger jig out of a box and they all get built to a jig fixture. That's
Yeah.
what I have personally shot for like over a decade and a half. And this was back before there was even brass inserts for these two
Hmm.
arrows. Like adding brass definitely will help add some accuracy to some of this. But like I pick an arrow, like when we build our arrows here, I mean, like any of these would be from there. I'm trying to pick an arrow that will steer the biggest assortment of broadheads
Yes.
to the center. I'm
And
trying to
that's
pick
a
a
four fletch,
broadhead.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
this
So
is like
yeah.
and then I'm also trying to stick to find a vein that doesn't come off, a vein that can go in a target, and when it comes out, it's not
Good memory.
wrinkled, compromising flight. It's not too rigid to where even if the profile is same as one that's not as rigid, it will have a different sound characteristic. I also want to make sure it's not too high to where it'll
Contact.
work with like, some of these brands that have very tight clearance on, either the top of the arrow rest or on the inside of their cables. And then also, at least from my point of view, I've found that with a four fletch with a very specific, helical, you minimize the sound because it's turning air and it's not chopping air,
Oh, makes sense. Yeah.
chopping air around. So, it's like, could you come up with, if you went there and you're like, I have this broadhead and I'm going to find out the exact arrow shaft and the exact vane configuration that would be the perfect thing for this broadhead, you could do it.
Yes. Yes.
But the
Out
thing
of
is, how many people never change any of that? Like, what the real secret is, how can you, like you said, have an arrow where this thing's in your quiver and maybe you have an iron wheel at it when you're sitting a water hole and you're right here, but maybe you've got like, for me, I know that if I'm taking a longer shot, a T2 for me has been freaking awesome. Does it fly better than any mechanical out there?
mm,
Ballistically, it's not shaped to do that,
nope.
but I can
Agreed.
tell you that it will deploy easier and it will
And it
give better
penetrates well.
penetration than the one that is better in maybe the accuracy category. But here's the thing, am I expecting this? Or now am I okay with this for a broadhead instead of that? But I'm getting 20%
Percent
more
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 penetration.
penetration
Agreed.
than than
Agreed.
a broadhead in the same category.
A hundred
Because here's the
percent.
thing, I know I'm not going to out penetrate an iron will with a T2. Like I know that. But
Yep.
like I said at the beginning, if you could guarantee me 12 to 16 inches of penetration on anything that I shoot really in North America other than a buffalo, and you can tell me it will hit behind the
The
pin or
pin.
right where I lays with my rangefinder, dude, sign me up because I'm
Yeah,
going to
agreed.
take serious trauma with a hole that can't self close
Yeah, agreed.
because even one hole on one side with double the spewage, like blood pressure is a real thing, you know?
Hmm.
And when it's dropping hard because of twice the leak, I just see more animals hit good and poor go down from trauma versus penetration.
Agreed.
And that's just a timeless argument that, and it's not really an argument, it's just debate. Like, I really enjoyed my conversation with a lot of the guys when they're doing, when they're doing the, when they're like looking at it objectively, like you, and I know that they're actually conducting the testing in a format that's fair to the end consumer. And with yours, I had seen some people involved and I knew that there was something going on, but then when I saw that it was actually being done the right way, I'm like, okay, this is actually going to be kind of cool. So I'm really appreciative that you allowed me to even ask you about this because
Yeah.
I had no idea what you found. You could have came on here and said, "Hey, dude, everything you've been saying is just a bunch of bullshit."
Yeah,
You know?
Dudley, you're full of shit. You know, and the kind of funny thing is everything, not everything. I'm definitely learning stuff, but a lot of this stuff is stuff that I've got enough intuition and you have even more intuition than me. You've been at this longer than me. Like these guys with gray hairs in the archery world know what they're talking about. And this data is a lot of it is backing a lot of things that I've heard the guys with gray hairs in the industry have been saying.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I wanted to say with what you were just talking about is how important it is to realize the scope of this project. This project did not talk internal ballistics. So I'm using, these are rifle terms. Internal ballistics is related to the bow, right? Like this was not an internal ballistics test, and it was not a terminal ballistics test.
Yeah.
We are not looking at how the different heads, nor am I giving any weight on the different heads, how they deploy on an animal. So for me to say this is an external ballistics test, right? We looked at drag and lift,
Yeah.
trajectory. So if I come out and show a plot that shows, I can come right out and say it, that the Thorn broadhead, have you heard of the Thorn
Yeah.
broadhead?
Yep.
It's literally like a plunger mechanism. It was ballistically superior to all mechanical broadheads.
Yep.
But I question, I don't have personal experience.
Yeah.
I'm not bagging on the Thorn. It rocked everybody's world ballistically.
Yep.
How do you feel about a mechanical mechanism, the plunger part of that, deploying your broadhead? That's just a question. I have
Are you
no pers
asking me or are you
No, no,
just
no, no.
roughly
Just
saying it?
no, I'm just
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah.
Like, so if I come out with a plot, I don't want people to just say, oh, no, there is no leading here. And I am
Yeah.
not saying that you need to shoot a T2 or a
Yeah.
sever or a dead meat. I'm literally going to be presenting you the data that we got in 2 days.
Yep.
2 days. Like, I have a full-time job elsewhere. There is no overarching governing body in archery that's paid me a salary of $100,000 to spend
Yeah.
300 hours organizing this test. You know what I mean? It is what it is. We've done the best to control things, and just because I say something, you don't need to take it as gospel. And I have not evaluated terminal ballistics. So everything that you were just saying about penetration, those are real.
Yeah.
Broadhead integrity, that's a real thing. The
Yeah.
chances of a broadhead not deploying, that's a
Blade
real thing.
sharpness. Yeah.
That's sharpness. I
The
have not
length
looked
of the
at,
ferrule and the
yes,
likelihood of a tear out. You know what I mean?
yeah, exactly.
All this
All
is
of
like,
that
these are real
important.
things. Yeah.
Correct.
Yep.
So this isn't to be, don't put your blinders on and just because and the other thing I was saying is drag and accuracy are not the same thing. There
Yeah.
were broadheads that the Beast broadhead performed exceptionally for drag, but
Yeah.
it didn't group as tight as like a Sever or a Schwacker or a Thorn.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
uh, T2 very similar. A lot of the mechanicals were right there. And then there were mechanicals that do create more cut, like a dead meat,
Yeah.
mega meat, Grim Reaper four blade. They have a bit more surface area and
Exactly.
they didn't group as good. And
Well,
they
and like, you look at I get asked about like mega meats versus T2s. Like I hunt out west a lot too. So I have to factor in long range shots and I also
Mhm.
have to factor in possibilities of follow-ups and what my penetration would mean at a longer range follow-up. So for me, one extra like if I shot a fixed blade head, which I've shot like Montech solids. I like the extra third blade for extra cutting diameter.
Yeah.
But when it comes to a mechanical, I'm already losing
Yeah.
penetration percentage technically because I'm
Hmm.
deploying a much, again, it's drag because I'm
Yeah.
now deploying more drag than what you're going to have on a smaller cutting surface. And by adding 33% more to that, right? If I factor
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
two
Hmm.
blade, if I'm going to go to a three, well, guess what? I'm adding 33.3 repeating
Hmm.
to that, which would then, that is going to have some sort of drag depending on the length of it or the pitch of it. Um, so yeah, that's like, that's what I was saying. There could be things where could a T2 be more, could there be less exposed blade on a T2 and it be just an absolute hooter shooter dream come
Yeah.
true? Yes. But if it never deployed, it would also really only be an eighth smaller than an iron wheel going through something. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
exactly. Yeah. So the
So,
other,
so like that's, then you have to start looking at it as like, okay, well, what are the true pros and the true cons, and what is the one variable that I'm not going to change because my mind is set on, whatever it is. Like when I did, and what's cool about this is they've allowed you to put this information out there. Some of the information that I've done, I was hired like you to collect data, but the data wasn't owned by me. So like when I came up with when I worked with like Norway for the fusion
fusion
vane,
vane. Yeah.
yeah, because and honestly like the pitch on the back of that vane was very specific to like, so for me when I was testing so one vane that was a short high profile vane had a very high point like this with a contour on the
Yeah. Yeah.
back. Okay, and it performed well, but it also made more noise. And if you clipped some of that off to where you would, I don't know,
Yeah.
like
It's a little
round it
more
a little bit,
rounded.
it would instantly not perform the way that it was. And what I think was happening is I think that ridge helped stiffen that airstream versus once it rounded, I thought the back of this became kind of fluttery
Hmm.
and you could almost hear that sound. So by having the straight drop on the fusions, I felt like we were eliminating the rear of the vane having instability in
Yeah.
it.
Kind of like that. Yeah. Hmm.
Exactly. So like, but I don't even shoot those vanes now. That was just a project, that I had, and now Norway's been sold, so who knows where all that data went. But like there's so many determining factors. It's just great that the listener, the everyday person can just finally say, oh, okay, there is a lot of number one choices. But that number one might not line up with the number one here. It might
Yeah.
actually line
Correct.
up best with number three over here.
Yeah.
And one and three actually gives me the best results for, having to shoot a mule deer at 65 yards.
Yeah.
You,
Agreed.
you know what I mean? Or,
Yep.
hey, I've got an elk and, if you're like, the whitetail hunter, we're like, dude, I hunt ridge tops. I make 20-yard shots. Honestly, like you could probably shoot whatever the freak you want.
Yeah.
Like,
Yep. Yep.
there's no point in me having an FOC argument with you because we're talking about, getting from point A to point 20 yards in
Yeah.
like, you know, 15 thousandths of a second or whatever it is. Like this isn't where we need to even care what each other
Yeah.
shoot. It's
Agreed.
once it gets further down there that all that starts to really factor in. This is going to be really cool, man. I think you're going to have a lot of fun. Now, did you so I just want to keep asking.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
so have you heard me talk in the past? Like people ask why I don't shoot 4 millimeter arrows. So I just talk about like what the
lighted
options,
knocks.
yeah, what
Yeah.
the
You're
so
a big
did you guys change any knocks at all to
no.
look at knock length and knock
No.
stiffness and how that
No,
affected?
no, but I mean that's something that we want to do. Knocks are obviously very important. That's the
Yeah.
contact with the string. It's delivering the full power stroke into the arrow.
Yeah.
There's a lot of the sweet spot. Obviously, if you think about the physics behind think about the physics behind it. The cross-sectional area of the 4 millimeter smaller, so there's less of a sweet spot for your string to hit versus 5 millimeter. The debate goes on and on.
Yeah.
One thing that this did, we did test 4 versus 5 millimeter, and I'll just come right out and say it. With an arrow that's built up from a hunting perspective. So
Yeah.
our control, which was max stealth, it's a very, very common vein in
Yeah.
the industry. So that's what we used as our control. So we built up the arrows the same control, just varied the shaft diameter, and 4 millimeter had 10 to 15% less drag than 5 millimeter.
Well, yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's gonna retain velocity downrange better. But
Yeah.
is that better? It has 4 millimeter has less sweet spot. It's a little harder to tune. You can't.
Shoot
I
a lighted knock. You have to use an
yeah
outsert. If you shoot a
yeah
bag target, it's
yeah
pink
or yeah
sock in your bag target every time you freaking do it. You know what I mean?
for me I shoot I really like I shoot the deep six hits. So my
Yeah.
personal arrow build has been a pro comp, which is now the X10 Parallel Pro for I think the
Yeah.
last 5 or 6 years, and
Yeah.
I shoot deep six hit insert and I shoot a collar over the top. I like the concentricity from the deep six, but you know what? If you're
These
shooting bag
babies.
target, yeah, those babies. I love that arrow. I basically have to do no knock tuning and I don't have to cull any arrow. Are they
Well,
the
you
most
picked the
durable?
best arrow in the world, dude.
Yeah, I mean,
Most people aren't dumping $500 a
no,
dozen.
the prices come down on those, man.
No, I'm
They're
just saying
like,
by the time you put broadheads on them and
yeah,
like
yeah.
all that jazz. But yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean it's incredible arrow, right? Like
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I shoot to the point. I mean, I'm no Bodie Turner, right? But at the Easton range at 77 or 80 yards or whatever, as far as I can shoot, like I can consistently put 4 or 5 arrows in that. Like
yeah,
3 to 4 inch group, pretty consistent. If it was a workout morning, am I going to do that? No. But
yeah,
if I'm, tried and true, 4 or 5 arrows in that, and dude, sometimes
yeah,
some of my best groups will be like a Bodie Turner, but Bodie's
yeah,
doing that every time,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And I just
yeah,
use and I don't. Bodie just won Vegas, right? So
yeah.
I use him as an example. He's a shooting machine.
But we're
So
also not out there like, I look at what I'm doing right now, and there's times where I go live and I just shoot for people and let them see like what I'm shooting. But I don't think people really realize that like, you know, I'm shooting
a
a,
hunting bow.
that peep sight,
Yeah.
no scope, and a 29 thousandths fiber. Like, we need to make sure people
Yeah.
realize, I'm still now when I go to tack, I change vanes and I
Yeah.
take the brass out of the front. I normally go down to a lighter arrow so I can get
Yeah. Maximize the
125
trajectory.
yards,
Yeah.
my peep height isn't very high with how I anchor. I actually hate the arrow below the center line of the face,
Hmm.
or between the lip and the bottom of the chin. Like I definitely if you're getting that kind of clearance, your arrow shaft has to be on the bottom edge of your jaw.
It is.
Um, and so for me, that's just like I've recognized with shooting machines, like how minimal the rear arrow pressure has to be for a huge deviation at that distance. So that's why I really want a place where there's 100% clearance. So like if you look at a picture of me at full draw, I worked to getting my anchor position and my head position to where the back of my arrow shaft is 100% clear to launch.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I learned from Dave Stepp years ago, because that guy had the most impeccable arrow flight of any person in pro archery and was one of the best long distance shooters I had ever like saw for firsthand for the first time. And he had just the lightest, cleanest freaking facial pressure and arrow deliverance. And honestly, with the crap that we shot back then when we all had to compete, like nothing was forgiving. A lot of
Yeah.
people were having to shoot a 4 inch overdraw to get an arrow light enough,
Yeah.
you know, and that's just everything about the setups were just horrible. But
We live in a really cool time in archery, man. It's really
the
cool.
best,
Yeah.
like I actually just said that the other day. Someone was I did an interview with We Are Hunter podcast. I don't know when it's going to come out, but I did a podcast with those guys, and I was talking about like we talked about Bodie, and I talked about like the fact that a lot of these new prodigies, they definitely could be like they could be at their prime, but we also may not know that they're at their prime yet. Like some of these people, there's always going to be pros that come in that just freaking burn the place down, and they're just that good, but then once they realize what they're doing, or sponsors get involved, or they get married, or they
Yeah.
like, you know what I mean? It's like both of us have way too many distractions to think we could go focus on being a professional athlete right now. Like
Yeah.
it's not happening with jobs and with wives and with, honestly, commitment to being part of those lives. But like those people have endless information, soon this information. Like imagine, someone like a Matthias or a Stefan or a Bodie at 12 years old, not having jack crap to do but shoot in their backyard with their friends every day, all
Yeah.
day. They're driving a brand new Z71 to junior high, and they're Googling, James Yates's freaking aero discoveries, and then they're going home and they've got an AX2, they got parallel pros, they got a movable sight, they've got like all this data. They have the ability to fletch their own stuff and not go to a shop and have
Yeah.
to risk whether or not the shop actually can make them reach their potential. Like there's no boundaries now in archery. Like, I'm actually more proud of what I did when I was competing, and honestly, it's more spectacular to me when I see like a Dave Stepp or an Ulmer, a Terry Ragsdale, a Jay Bars. Like, dude, you look at these people and what they did with what they had.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
Crap. Yeah,
Yeah,
agreed.
there's no doubt that like scores would have been on a very different trajectory had all this knowledge been in place. And and I was ridiculed for a long time by sharing information with other countries and other teams because for the longest time we were really trying to contain as much of that as we
Mhm.
could. And now it's just like,
It's out
once
there.
the internet was there, I'm like, you know
Yeah, it's
what? Like, I'm going to become better because everyone else is going to become better around us.
yeah.
And, and, and that's what's happening. Literally, the everyday person, I wouldn't say the everyday person, but let's say there's probably 30% of the people that I see come to Bigfoot at TAC events. They could have competed in the pro class. They could have at least been better than a lot of the top 20 to 30 people were back in mid 90s. Like
Hmm.
those same people, like we weren't shooting 100-yard shot.
Yeah.
The knock on course averaged 68 yards. I mean, dude, you shoot a 68-yard course and not lose an arrow. That's pretty dang impressive
Yeah.
compared to what archers were in the 90s.
Yeah.
With the equipment we had, you might have only talked to one or two friends of yours about what you were finding out. Everybody was like watching Ulmer to try to figure out what the hell he was doing, and he wasn't telling anybody. I remember stealing one of his arrows out of a target. I'm sure I still have it, but because I just wanted to take the point out and figure out like what he was actually shooting for point weight.
What point? Wait. Yeah. And
It was
everything
something
you.
stupid. It was like 70 grains.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, because dude, we were all trying to get
Yeah,
280
the tra
feet a
yeah,
second
yeah,
with
the
bows that
trajectory.
had an IBO speed of 295.
Yeah. You're
I mean,
approaching that
what are you going to
ideal.
do? And you want to
Yeah.
shoot a 2312? Fat boys aren't even available yet.
Yeah.
I mean,
So you,
let me see here. That's a swedged back.
oh, yep.
And what's crazy is so this was part of the original true flight testing. There's the original right there. It's like
Hmm.
the original. You can see true flight on those veins.
Yep.
But yeah, so that's like a 2312 Ultra, and that's 70 grain. It's a 70 grain point right there.
Yep.
No, like no regard for FOC at all. You know what I
Yep.
mean?
Yeah, it's cool too is where we've come and it's kind of some of the industry standard that is kind of holding on from that day. I kind of just brought to mind with that aluminum arrow. So you know why, and you know this, but to get it out there, you know, straightness, right? So arrows are, you buy different grades of arrows, match grade, whatever, and you understand that the reason why straightness is listed on the box and call it weight, even though I think that's the least important, and is because of what you just held up, the aluminum days. Spine consistency is perfect on an aluminum shaft,
Yeah,
assuming that it's well built, right? But
yeah,
straightness is the problem.
yeah,
So in our industry today, where we have this eye on straightness, it's just a holdover from the aluminum days. And
yeah,
now that we're in the carbon world, spine consistency around the shaft and the spine consistency shaft to shaft, that is the weak link of a carbon arrow. And
yeah,
that is way more important now. And the industry as a whole isn't focused on that because we're stuck in the rut from the aluminum days and it's just being carried over. Similarly, this concept of when IBO of a bow was 295, like you were eking out more of the total stored energy. Now this is internal ballistics here. You're eking back in the day when bows weren't as efficient, the limb pockets and cam designs and limbs, you were shooting a 550 grain arrow to eke out the most energy out of that system.
hmm.
And now we're like 80, 90. I don't know the mechanical efficiency rating, but we've got to a point now where
We're as efficient as it's possible to get. Like Hoyt,
with a
eh,
mechanical system.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like there has to be a change in a part of the equation. Like
Yeah,
either
bow radically has to,
there has to be a brand new limb material that's like
yeah,
spring steel that actually, somehow doubles stored energy that's put in
yeah,
there, or, all of a sudden we need to come up with a new string material where it's like one strand and it's half the
yeah,
diameter of the current string to where, we're now able to have less mass going through the air. It's like something like that has to change. But right now, every bow model that we're looking at, it's like if it's got more speed, it's because it has a shorter power stroke.
yep. Shorter power
I
stroke.
mean,
Yep.
it's like, what fit do you want for your
For year.
face and
Yes.
what feel do you want out of the
Yep.
bow? Other than that, if you're looking at numbers on bows, I think with the new Gen 4 cam from Hoyt's point of view, they've nailed it.
Yeah.
Like the
I love the cam.
RX9 and the new system is way better than the 8 was. The 8 was a shooter. And people ask me like, what's more accurate? Okay, well, they're both if you have an 8, you're not going to gain accuracy. What you're going to gain is performance.
And
Because
tunability,
well, yeah,
honestly.
and the
Horizontal
performance,
knock traf
yeah, the
horizontal knock
performance,
travel on the nine's better.
yeah, and the performance is where I would say, you're going to have more tunability, you're going to have more stability in what your string's doing going forward. It's going to be easier for you to tune an arrow that's on the verge of
Yeah.
being too weak or too
Yep.
stiff.
Agreed. Yep. That
So
bigger sweet
like
spot.
so now you're actually getting an advantage out of the performance, but not, but if you do all those things right on the older stuff, dude, I can't say that I'm like more accurate now than what I was before. When I say before, I'm like referring to like 10 years ago. I feel like
Mhm.
my accuracy has actually held true, but so has my equipment choices. Like, I've like kind of dug my feet in the ground for like, hey, I try a lot of stuff, and when I make mistakes, these things don't make my mistakes like um detrimental to the outcome of the performance. Like I feel like my ease of getting there is certainly better, and I've been able to continually increase the weight of my arrow to keep my like I love my
Yeah.
I know my pin gaps. I don't
Yeah.
want to
That like
relearn
your
my pin gaps.
290. Yeah.
Yeah, so if a new bow comes out and like let's say this thing, let's just look at like an RX-9 Ultra versus an RX-8. There's some draw links. There was a big jump.
Yeah.
Well, if
Giant
you've
jump.
totally learned that previous system, dude, well now you can go to an FMJ
Yeah.
if you want
Maintain the
to
same
and
velocity.
maintain the same thing, or you can now get a 60-pound RX-9 Ultra or an AX2, and you can shoot one of the Easton 5.0s, and now the lightness of that shaft matched with the performance of the new cam system. Now all of a sudden you're getting the same performance out of a bow at 60 pounds
It's more
as you
shootable.
were, well, I can't say last year, but let's say 3 or 4 years ago that you were having to do at 7 pounds more,
Yeah.
which is really cool. Like people don't realize how important that is, but like I'm at a level where if I shoot 80 pounds, I have to seriously start looking at a 250 or a 200 spine.
Yeah.
And when I start looking at that, the downside to the
Yep.
weight increase becomes more problematic than the gain of me shooting 80 pounds and
Agreed.
getting extra penetration. So like I shoot 74 and a half pounds because that allows me to maintain the stability of my arrow without having to change the entire arrow class. And so
Agreed.
that then I've got the accuracy I want out of my broadhead. I'm cool with the penetration aspects to the distance that I see as my maximum terminal distance. And I'm able to shoot a system where my pin gap is not that hard to understand. And I can honestly, like on my hunting bow, if my sight's set at 20 yards, and I have last year actually, so all of yeah, so this would be a perfect example. So, like to a lot of people, they would say that's one of the knock-on match grade axis. This little line actually tells me it's not. This is actually a 5.0 in disguise because I've been
Oh.
using these for a while. So yeah, so this is a 5.0 in disguise. So like, um, so what's cool is like when I'm shooting this many reps, people need to understand I can't shoot this many reps at hunting weight. Like this bow, this all four of these bows that are here are all like they're all sharing the load of me shooting them, and
Mhm,
all these ones right here are all about 61 to 62 and a half pounds.
mhm.
So like I'm able to go to a 5.0 and get the same performance that I will out of my hunting bow once I do switch over to 74 pounds, which will
Yeah.
probably be about 3 weeks before season, and I'm actually shooting my broadheads. Then I'll switch over to that, but instead of having, well, I can either shoot this arrow at a much faster speed, which I think I would love this year for like antelope and long
Oh,
distance
dude.
mule deer, but I can also go to a 520 grain axis, shooting
290.
298,
Yeah.
with like, so
That's a ton of weight
Behind
behind.
an arrow going almost 300 feet
yeah,
per
I'm like
second.
right at 100 foot-pounds of kinetic
Oh
energy.
man, that's tremendous. Yeah, and all of that, like, yep. And I like there's reasons behind everyone doing what they're doing, and I've settled into this. I really like that 310 number. It's worked out
Yeah.
well for me
Joel
with the
Maxfield like you're actually very similar to where Joel is, and what's funny is a certain group of I guess certain people of how they look at arrow weight and everything that like can't stand what he's doing. But the thing is, like, show me one of them that's killed more than Joel.
Yeah, exactly.
I
And
mean,
I,
honestly, that's where I have to say, like, you you're looking at data and you're starting to realize, wait, this is changing my opinion on some things. Am I right? Our data for all this crap is on plywood, steel drums, freaking ballistic gel. You need to look at the people that have seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of live animals on their hooves being shot with these things. And those people have a very good idea of like what bails you out of trouble, what,
Yes,
what
it does. Range.
or hey man, I've been, hey, yes, this broadhead shoots like a freaking field point all day long, but you know what? If you've been crawling out on a antelope for like 2 hours, and by the time you're out there, it's 1 in the afternoon, and now you've got a pretty standardized western wind of 15 to 22 miles an
Yeah.
hour. Okay, very, very different
Yes.
scenarios happening. I was going to show you this one other thing here. I'm sure it's in this drawer. Um,
I was gonna say
if I'm drawing similarities to Joel and his arrow setup, that I'm in good company because that guy knows what he's doing.
yeah,
Been
yeah,
in the industry a long time, and I range forgiveness, range forgiveness, range forgiveness. That's me.
yeah. So this
You could,
was when I did like wind, because I tested like this is a little device where can you see that propeller in there?
yeah, yeah,
So
yep.
like I could hold this outside and it would tell me the average wind speed. And
Hmm.
then I could, when I would have the wind speed that I wanted, then I would plunge my shooting machine to like plot drift.
Hmm. Yep.
So like if drift comes into play, something like this will be, unless we could develop fans that had a standardized,
Yeah, so
you
we
know,
were we were looking at both of those, and I was scoping that out in the project to bring 10 or 20 industrial grade fans into the room.
yeah,
And I think we're going to need to just rent out the whole facility to do that. The other good thing is there's a pretty steady left to right breeze at the Easton Foundation there from west to east.
yeah, yeah.
And
Heading towards the airport.
yeah, so
Yeah,
the other thought, we're probably going to do some testing when we get to the drag for next year if we're going to do fans. Obviously, I do a lot of long range, not obviously, but I do a lot of long range rifle muzzleloader shooting as well. I'm very familiar with kestrels and wind meters, very important, especially in that world. So the other concept that we've had is pray that we've organized this on a steady windy day and literally get like 50 kestrels and figure out how to record the live wind data, whether that's setting up a camera on every kestrel so that we have time synchronized wind, like
yeah,
and we've got the kestrels positioned kind of in the trajectory arc of
yeah.
of the arrows. So that's been a couple of things that we've considered. We're still uh Easton, myself, and Tristan are Tyson. Tyson's already like, yep, I'm increasing your budget for next year. We're gonna make this a thing. And so there's just like I just want to say before we end, like I cannot thank Easton enough. This is a dream. This has been a dream of mine for a very long
It's a
time.
ballsy move for them.
It's
I'm
a
not gonna lie.
Easton
I
just
told,
disclosed their shooting machine, very proprietary.
yeah,
And I will AAE built the shooting machine a long time ago.
yeah,
But there have been substantial modifications to that machine to get it to do what it's doing. It was
yeah,
not pneumatically driven before.
yeah,
The tunability of that system is insane, and they just showed the world, man.
yeah,
They just they just showed the world. Easton, this isn't other than showing kind of some of the performance of the groups that we were shooting out of the shooting machine,
yeah,
and that it took very little arrow tuning to
yeah,
to accomplish that. They're not getting any. Easton is completely a bystander here. They donated shafts,
yeah,
and the shaft, it could have been a victory arrow for all that matters, right?
yeah,
But Easton, I bet you by the time you plot up all the time that I was with Easton Engineers and the hours spent in terms of salary, renting out the facility, supplying I mean, they're going to have spent 20 to 30 thousand dollars on this.
yeah, yeah. And well, and the reality is we know, and I say we because I don't, I'm pretty sure I'm coming on like my third year being part of Easton. And honestly, I'm
30th.
30th. Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry,
not
third.
definitely not third.
Yeah, the 30th. And I've got like I've got stuff that I did with James Park, and James has some amazing stuff back when honestly when this was being developed. I was lucky to be part of that deal. Um but Easton knows that, well, they know what their product does, and they've taken the high ground, which I think is very important for the industry. I think some of the true leaders to the industry take the high ground and just showing, trying to talk about their product and what it's doing right versus what other people are doing wrong. I really try to do that too. And I tell people, I'm like, straightness, the consistency of the spine, the consistency of the
around the
diameter
shaft
for the entire radius of that arrow, that
is number one.
and straightness is one and two. The weight, like people that spend a ton of time matching points with the arrow
Yeah,
shaft,
I don't do that.
yeah, what like weight can vary probably, I would say 3 to 4 grains.
Three grains you're not going to see.
Okay. But the consistency in spine and the consistency and straightness across that entire spine is absolutely critical. And that's why, like, when I went out there and shot that one day and then went down there and I'm like, there's right helical, there's left helical, there's this type of shaft, there's that type of shaft. They're all like in that freaking 12 or whatever on the elk. And I'm like, the groups are the same. Like, you have to get good at plotting your group. And when you're wasting time switching from this to that to this to that, you're not actually doing what's most important, and that's becoming accurate.
Yeah,
Give yourself the tools to be accurate, and then you have to become accurate. And
yeah,
when that happens, you are a freaking deadly combination. And truthfully, when that happens, your ability to sift through the bullshit is getting ready to like take a different step too. And I know that you've done that, and I appreciate, like, when I look at what you've done, I'm like, okay, I feel like I'm talking to someone that isn't gonna like miss a critical thing to this discussion. You've figured out, like, wait a minute, there's actually a shitload that's going into this. And the more that goes into it, the more specific that we really need to be to compare apples to apples or
yeah,
oranges to oranges. And in the end, we're kind of saying, hey, we have apples, oranges, pears, kiwis, and bananas. And all of these make a good fruit basket if you like organize them the right. Well, I shouldn't
right
say
way.
all
Yeah,
of them, but there's multiple ones that can make a
a
perfectly
good.
good meal, but everybody's place setting won't be the same thing if their main entree is different down that
Yeah,
line. You know
agreed.
what I
Yep.
mean?
What I what I would
Recommend if I started a company where I gave very personalized like if I responded to the I've got between comments, unanswered comments on a few reels, on my Instagram, Yates in the Backcountry, and direct messages, thousands. There
Yeah.
are a couple of thousands of unanswered questions, and I
Yep.
can't get to them all,
Yeah.
right? A few of my very, very close friends, I've showed this. Obviously, Tristan's seen it. Easton guys haven't seen any of the data.
Yeah.
We are 3 weeks minimum away from having visualizations done. But if I were to start a consulting company and everything that I would have to ask the person and actually, and I'm not even going to trust what they're telling me. I want to see it. I want to see what you do with a fletched arrow at 15 feet. I want to see your consistency. I want to see your group tune. I just want to see, right? If you're shooting 60 pounds, like, I like where you've settled on the four-fletch, like for the reasons that you're doing it, for clearance. And yeah, if you're shooting 60 and you want to 60 pounds, you got a 28-inch draw length and you want to get 100 yards out of tack, yeah, you should really think about a four-fletch because you don't have that cock vein sticking straight up, and you don't, you know, the sight clearance that we're talking about
Yeah.
versus hey, I just like shooting foam. Well, man, I can build you a really badass arrow with, the uh, this Vane, for example. AAE, this is I can't what's this profile
It's a
called?
PM 2.0.
Yeah, and then the Flex Fletch version of that, like the
Yeah, the
some of those
FF,
veins,
the FF
FF
2. Well, it'd be a
FFP 187.
185.
Yeah,
Yeah, one.
187.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay. Yep.
187. Yeah. Sorry, I've
Which is on
got
all my X10s over there, by the way. Like well, that flex vein was awesome until you had to fletch about 5 dozen of
yeah,
them.
yeah, that they are.
And then you needed a week to get that done.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, exactly. So the fletching, yeah, all of that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it really just depends on your circumstance. So again, we're going to be presenting data, and you're going to be able to take data, not opinion, right? This is trying to be as opinion free as we can make it. Going to present the data. I wish we could have gotten more shots done with the lift recovery. I'm being fully transparent there. We're going to present the data. We're taking the human element out of it, and you're going to be able to do some introspection. And this is no longer going to be based off of his opinion or his opinion. You're going to have data to make some sound decisions for yourself. And you're going to have to also look at your own philosophy on terminal ballistics, right? You're going to
Yeah.
have to look at your own. I'm not going to say fixed blade versus mechanical. I'm presenting ballistic data that you get to go and make that decision, right?
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I'm not going to respond to 2,000 direct messages or comments on Instagram saying this is best for you.
Yeah.
So, but we do plan on I'd certainly be following Yates in the Backcountry, Precision Cut Archery, and Easton Archery over the next few weeks because as we do develop these charts and these visualizations and the results, it's taking time.
Yeah.
Nothing about this study was half-assed. It's taken me in a year and a half to plan.
Yeah.
And the results are not going to be half-assed. So it's going to take time. But between now and then, we're doing something like releasing this podcast, where I've already started showing some stuff on my Instagram. We have media teams backing us from several different companies. And we're going to be releasing some tidbits over the next couple of weeks, just that the media guys are pulling together, and Tristan and I are giving our blessing on to kind of leak that. So it's going to be coming out a little over the next few weeks, and then
Yeah.
hopefully in June, sometime late June, we're going to be full wide open. Have a podcast with you, talk about the results, maybe social charts. I'm writing Hunter's takeaway about this in Western Hunter.
Okay.
Also, Western Hunter magazine. It's the set a conversation similar to this is going to be had, and maybe more the physics behind it, but dumbed down. So, I don't mean this in a derogatory way, just so that the masses could maybe understand it in a written text. That's going to be
Yeah.
as part of the Western Hunter subscription, the issue, but I'm planning on releasing my take on the results for hunters on the Western Hunter website. That's going to have some charts dumbed down for, I say dumbed down. They're not going to have like the crazy statistics data in it, just like what the layman can understand from this and my take in a written description on the Western Hunter website. And then we do plan on putting like really sophisticated, like the statistical stuff, the kind of the raw data in a visualization format on the Precision Cut Archery website.
Okay.
Um, so there's going to be multiple ways that people digest this. The other big thing that I just want to give another kind of shout out, Easton over the top. Really, people need to applaud Easton for this effort. It was completely selfless.
Yeah.
And the other big one, I have a box of 300 arrows over here to my left, and Black Ovis Arrow ID in Salt Lake City, Utah, built 300 arrows and probably refletched 100 arrows while we were there for free.
That's awesome.
Um, so Black Ovis, strong thank you to Black Ovis. Jace Johnson in particular over there was great to work with. I was very pleased with the fletching quality, the exactness of that build. So they did a really good job there.
Yeah, that's sweet. No, I'm pumped, dude. I'm high five. I'd
Thanks, man.
yeah, I definitely commend you and I feel like a I don't know, I feel like a grandpa, I guess. I feel like a dad that's seeing the whole industry like start to one, I think they start to like listen more, but then with that, there's so much ability for people to say whatever the heck they want, and a lot of channels try to maximize the clickbait of
Oh,
these types
clickbait.
of
Yeah.
things. But like there's there's some people that are doing it for the true good of the industry. And also, and doing it in a way that where it doesn't, crap on people in the industry too, that just may not, you don't know what you don't know. And honestly, that's, I see this stuff every day where some people are honestly like taking a poke at a certain way that I do something and they're showing an example and I'm just laughing at the way that they're showing the example because it's not fair to show it that way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I really appreciate that you guys are doing it the way that you're doing it. Again, my hat's off to Easton too. I wasn't hired to be part of this thing. I was more interested in it. And then like I think once I expressed interest, you guys welcomed me in. So
Oh, 100%.
I really appreciate that. And I would love to, I would love to be more in too. So, there's plenty of time for some extra stuff like that. And I've told you like, you know, I think I've got something that'll be even crazier down the road. So
Yeah. You've been hitting.
Hitting at it. Yeah, Dudley. We plan on Tyson, kind of the main project sponsor over there at Easton. We actually share the same last name and pretty good
I know
friends.
I asked that.
Yeah, but we're probably distantly related, but Tyson's been great he's been a good friend for a while, and he's already telling me that this is going to be a yearly thing, the James Science Lab here, and so yeah, it'd be fun to get. I mean, you
He said that
probably
to me too. He's like, dude, like, what do you think about this or that? I'm like, we did it like prior to you, we did it. We just didn't do it like in the center at that capability. And we also like you didn't let the shooting machines out of the bag. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. And honestly, I think over a year ago when I first was proposing this, I think they were still flirting around with the idea if I could show the shooting machine. I've seen it, right?
Yeah.
I've been in the Easton warehouse all several times. I go over there and talk with the engineers. Yeah, and they committed to it, and I just really applaud Easton for the selfless act that they've
Yeah.
allowed this to happen, and they gave me something that I needed. Like I wasn't going to spend 20 grand out of my own pocket to do this,
Yeah.
and I needed that shooting machine, and not to lose sight of Tristan and Precision Cut.
And you
If
had
he
engineers around you. I mean,
correct.
for Hoyt to send, you know, Gideon and, was Daniel over there probably?
Daniel, so Gideon came over and was really helping us set up the high-speed camera. So we got a lot
Okay.
of high-speed camera footage. So that was Gideon's main
Yeah.
role
Okay.
over there, and he was just interested. Daniel came over kind of for about a 30-40 minute period just to kind of shoot the shiz, shoot the
Yeah.
breeze. The whole Hoyt R&D team came over, and we were just chatting about the study and what I was looking for, what I wanted to accomplish.
Yeah.
Um, so that was cool. And then obviously we had at minimum two Easton engineers there the whole time, myself
Yeah, so I mean,
and Tristan. So,
you're talking, whatever, $500,000 in salaries, freaking sitting over there
Days to
giving you
2 days.
aid for two
Yes.
days. You know what I
Correct.
mean?
And not to mention,
you have an idea of probably what it took to organize this effort and to think through everything. And a few other people would probably understand that with what
Yeah.
you've organized on your platform.
Yeah.
This was a trim. I have a 7-page proposal that I gave to Easton trying to document this, and I still had to have like a 2-hour meeting explaining how we were going to accomplish this.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
took a tremendous amount of preparation, and it's gonna take some time to close the loop on everything. And it's just opening up the door what's possible to actually test, like this wind drift and FOC. Just a couple of thoughts for the next study.
Yeah.
Drilling down, like the true champions, I'll just call them the true champions, the guys, the Vanes and the Broadheads that produce this rare combination of low drag and good lift. I'd love to drill down on those a little more and try to figure out, okay, if we make some small iterations on these, can we get it even better, right? Like
Yeah.
we were really broad, like my hands are out of view, but we were really
Yeah.
broad in this test, and it would be fun to narrow down in a couple of different places, which we just couldn't do in this broad test.
Well, the thing is, then you narrow it down, and then all of a sudden you get four different variations to the same vein, but with
Yeah,
slightly different, you know, ridges putting in different places, stiffness on a certain part of the
yeah,
vein, lighter at the top, different types of materials all of a sudden might be like, holy shit, that thing shoots so freaking good, but you can't stick it to an arrow. So
yeah.
it doesn't make any sense.
It
Like
doesn't. Yeah,
you're gonna, you're, yeah, get ready, Alice in Wonderland.
yeah. So the
If you're
cool
gonna,
thing here is,
if you're gonna go deep down the rabbit holes.
yeah. So the cool thing here is, I'm not doing anything that hasn't been tried to be done in the industry. Like you have done, and you said that you feel like a dad or a grandpa in the industry, and I'm not saying you're you are an OG, man. Like I have a lot of respect for you and you trying to teach the industry. Um, and to some extent, whether somebody likes you or not, we're all kind of disciples of those who came before us, right? Especially those who really care about the sport. Like to
Yeah,
say that I don't have any influence from John Dudley is bullshit. Like that, and anybody, like any sort of tuning method, how I time my peep or how I time my knock set points. Pro They may be exactly, I don't know specifically, but it's probably originated from somebody far before me. So I'm not trying to take credit that I'm inventing the wheel. I just saw an opportunity with the math that Precision Cut Archery has done, which I
yeah.
understand
The trig is
that,
so important to this whole thing, and you
yeah,
need someone like him or like, someone like freaking Eric at Leopold that, did all the full draw four,
yes,
like you need a pair, you need like a George Tekmachov. There's people that's what their brain does. You can't do it on your own. And then you need the people like Nick Fisher. I'm not taking credit for everything I've learned in archery either. I've been really fortunate to be behind the scenes since 18 years old when I was hired at Matthews. And then because I know what's happening at Matthews, Easton lets me see what's happening there. And then honestly, the longer you keep your mouth shut, the deeper in the vault you go.
yeah, yeah,
And so, listen, Daniel and Gideon have taught me a shitload, as
yep,
have, probably several of the people that you saw at the Easton thing. All these people have paved a way for us. And what we need to realize is there's actually some people that are truly OGs that really aren't getting credit in the industry because they're a hired engineer and they're freaking unbelievable at knowing their materials
yeah,
or like what, structures or the process of how to put it together and build these crazy things. And especially like if people actually come and see what Easton does to build arrows, and then if you go see like how some arrows are made overseas that come over here and get the same price tag, you're not even looking at the same freaking thing happening. But there's also NDAs in place. You get one now too,
yep,
where you you don't know what you don't know, and if you're not allowed to tell someone that they don't know someone, then it's really hard because you're in
yeah.
a way you're kind of in handcuffs. So it's just awesome this information's getting out there because there's now people like you that are smart enough to start say like, okay, wait a minute. Actually, if I go far enough back, I can realize I could have saved myself a shitload of time. And that's what I'm trying to do. Save everybody time from the 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 wasted rat holes.
that
You know,
you've already gone down through.
focus on the ones that where you go in. It's like it almost gets more and more and more, rather than going down the one to where you realize it's just a freaking dead end at the very end of it. And you're like, oh man, this was 9 months of my life. And in the end, this just doesn't do what I thought it was going to do.
Agreed. Yeah. So like I've got this, my job, I kind of serve, um, I've got this, I've got a pretty good ability to interact in the project management side of things and then also deep diving into the technical.
Okay.
Um, so and I kind of bring that here, being able to manage and think through the effort, the creativity involved with this, but then also like deep dive into the math and understand the physics. Um, to know to sort of bring precision on was awesome. The fact that I wouldn't need to go and deep dive into the physics on this, he's got a very robust program that I've looked at and I agree with. Like I put my stamp on Tristan and Precision Cut Archery,
Yeah.
and then that shooting machine from Easton. And as soon as I got this, Tyson, you think you'd be okay with me using the shooting machine? Because I've been talking with Tristan over Precision Cut Archery, and in my head for the last couple of years, I've really wanted to do this archery ballistics theme, and I've already written a couple articles about it, and I want to take it to the next level. And right now, and then let's not forget that Doppler radar, right?
Yeah.
I need that Garmin.
Yeah.
Uh, um, to in order to record these ballistic effects. So everything came together to do this the way that I'm doing it right now. So not to say that studies before this that others have done, this has been studied, but I have tools available to me right now that that's probably taking the study one step further.
Well, for sure. And it's allowing you to put it all in front of people and you're honestly coming in where you've already mentioned multiple brands where historically that wouldn't have happened, Like even if I talked on subjects, I'd have to put a hard break on certain topics because I wasn't allowed to talk about something beyond a certain point, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So you're kind of coming in where Easton's just saying like we're going to give you the tools to do this. We're confident enough to where we're going to look pretty good when all this shakes out at the end of it. We're going to give you exactly what you need and put you in front of the right people. So
Yep.
yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, I'm hats off, man. I commend you for it.
Hey,
And I hope it continues for you. And you've been a gentleman and, pleasure talking to you too as well. So
yeah.
just let me know how I can help.
Yeah, Dudley, appreciate it.
Tristan and I need to get back into the weeds on analyzing data and coming up with the right visualizations to present. And we kind of imagine two tiers to that, something that's a little easier to understand and interpret, so you don't need a master's degree in physics or
Yeah.
fluid dynamics. And then we're going to have a place for the raw data to be too. Like we fully anticipate putting up the raw data on
Yeah.
Tristan's website. So you have an issue with it? Great. There is no governing body. This is what we decided to do. Like
Yeah.
I'm not, I have no product behind me that I'm trying to defend. I'm not trying to bash anybody. It's just going out there. This
Yep.
is James Yates's science lab, and it is what it is, and that's
It's
what we wanted to
perfect.
do.
It's perfect. Yeah, thank you for doing it, man. Well, we'll connect again soon enough. And
Yeah.
thank you, man. I really
Hey,
do appreciate it and look forward to honestly look forward to June.
yeah, exactly. Thanks, Dudley. You're the man. Appreciate you and all you do for the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. Knock on everybody. Be sure to check out knockonarchery.com for our full line of custom designed products as well as free in-depth education and bow hunting entertainment to help you shoot at your best.